Hey everyone, and welcome back to Daily Tuition. In this course, I'm going to show you how you can make this beautiful blog website using Next.js. We understand the basics of Next.js. Now let's take a look at how you can use that basic information and build a real-world examples. So we're going to make this beautiful blog website, and I'm going to make different pages of it, just like the home page and the blog page. So let's dive in and see how we can make this beautiful blog website using Next.js. I'm going to open the Visual Studio Code editor, and inside this, I'm going to simply open the empty folder projects. And inside this project, let me create my Next.js project. So I'm going to open my terminal, and you can see I'm using the project directory to create this blog project. You can choose any directory name, that's upon you. So here inside this project directory, I'm going to create a new Next.js project. So I'm going to say here npx create next app, and then I'm going to specify name to this application blog. That's upon you. You can specify any name to this application. I'm going to press enter, and this is going to create a new Next.js project inside this project directory. You can see the project is successfully built. Now let's cd into the project directory. So let me clear the screen, cd into the blog project directory, and say npm run dev. This will start the development server on the local host 3000. You can notice, just click on this link, and this is going to open a new Next.js project. Now we already learned this, how you can set up the Next.js project in the previous Next.js course. Now let's take a look at how you can set up the Tailwind CSS in the Next.js project. When you open this blog project, you have the Next.js project structure. Before we start creating a new component, let me set up and install Tailwind CSS inside this project. In this project, we are using Tailwind CSS to style the component. So I'm going to open a new tab, and I'm going to search for Tailwind CSS. And here I'm going to click on tailwindcss.com. Click on get started, and I'm going to click on this framework guide. From here I can choose my favorite framework I'm working with. So I'm working with Next.js, so just click on this Next.js, and here you have different commands to set up the Tailwind CSS with Next.js. So you have to first create your project. We already done that. Enter into your project directory and then install Tailwind CSS. So let me just copy this first command, open my terminal. Let me just stop the development server just for now, and I'm going to enter here npm install -d tailwind css post css and auto prefixer. And when I press enter, this is going to install all these three libraries inside this Next.js project. Once we have that, next we have to create Tailwind CSS and post CSS file to configure Tailwind CSS. So we just need to copy this command and specify that just right here. When you enter this command and press enter, inside your files, you will get two more files here, postcss.config.js and tailwindcss.config.js. Both these files are used to configure Tailwind CSS in Next.js project. Just after that, you have to open the Tailwind CSS configuration file and copy and paste this statement. We are informing Tailwind CSS that we are using Tailwind CSS inside the component folder and inside these pages. So let me just copy this, open the tailwind config.js file, just like this, and I'm going to select this content and paste my statement, something like this. Let me save this file, and then just after that, you have to add tailwind directives to your CSS file. As you know, in Next.js, you have to add these directives inside the global file. So just copy this back to the global CSS, which you have inside the styles folder. Open the styles folder and open the global.css. Here at the top, right up here, I'm going to paste these directives. These directives is going to create different CSS classes inside this global file. So when you execute Next.js, it will build all the CSS classes of Tailwind inside a dedicated CSS file. And we can use all the Tailwind CSS classes in the Next.js project. So once you done that, let me show you how you can use Tailwind CSS. Here we have the simple home component. And inside this home component, we have h1 heading tag with hello world text. Let me copy this back to my project, save the changes, close this global file and this Tailwind file. Minimize these styles, back to the pages, and open the index.js. This is the default file, right? I'm going to get rid of all this code right from here because this is the default file you will get with Next.js, and paste here h1 heading tag with hello world. Now let me save this. Open the terminal, and don't forget to start the development server again. I'm going to say npm run dev. When I press enter, the development server is started on localhost 3000. And when I'm back to the localhost 3000, you can see I'm going to have my hello world. To this text, I'm going to have font bold and underline. So you'll see we have underline and font bold. If I want to increase the font size, I can specify here text 6XL. Save the changes. Now I have font size 6XL to this text. And if you want to specify any color, you can simply specify text indigo 500. Save this. You can see you're going to have your text color. So using Tailwind CSS, it's super easy to build this complete blog website. If you want to know more about Tailwind CSS, I have a dedicated course on it. You can check out that course from the link provided in the description. So let's start building this complete blog using Tailwind CSS. Now, once you successfully set up the Tailwind CSS with Next.js project, let me show you how you can create the navigation menu. To create a navigation menu, you have to open your Explorer tab, and inside your project, right inside this block, you have to create a new folder component and create a new file inside it. If you create your navigation menu inside these pages, then the end user can easily access your individual component using navbar route. So instead of creating all the components of this project inside this pages folder, we create a new folder inside this block and we name that folder components. And inside these components, we create all the components of this project. So let me first create a new file here, and I'm going to name this file header.js. Inside this file, I'm going to add the navigation menu of this project. So let me first add this header inside my index.js. Now because inside this, I have a default hello world text, I'm going to just get rid of this h1, and here I'm going to add a division tag like this, and I'm going to import my component header file here. Import header from, then I'm going to specify the path of this header file. So I'm going to say here // components, and inside that we have header. And then I'm going to print this header over here. Save these changes. You're going to get an error message because inside this file, I don't have any element. So let me just create a React functional component like this. And here I'm going to get rid of this import statement because in Next.js, you don't have to import React manually. And then I'm going to save this file. Now you can see we have this header here. Let me just create the finished website header. So here I'm going to say header, and to this header we specify some Tailwind classes. So I'm going to specify here class name and then specify here bg gray 50. This class is going to specify gray 50 background color to this header. If I hover over this class, you can see I'm just going to specify the background color with the RGB value. Just out of that, I'm going to say div, and to this div, I'm going to specify some class names. So I'm going to specify some Tailwind class names here. So I'm going to say XL container. Then I'm going to specify XL MX auto. Now you can notice I am using here XL breakpoint. I only want to apply these classes when the viewport is greater than XL breakpoint. You can notice when I hover over it, you can see when the viewport is greater than 1280 pixel, I wanted to apply this container. The same goes for this MX auto as well. I wanted to apply this MX auto, margin left auto and margin right auto when the viewport is greater than 1280 pixel. Just for that, right inside it, I'm going to add 3 different elements. So I'm going to first add here a div again, and then add the first element, which is the input text box. Then I'm going to add again a new div, and then I'm going to add my title. So I'm going to add here an anchor tag, something like this. I'm not using href because I'm using link component instead of anchor tag. And then to this anchor tag, I'm going to specify design. Just out of that, just out of this div right down here, I'm going to add another div, and then inside this, I'm just going to add a flex box, something like this, and add different social media icons. As you know, I don't have any social media icons imported in this project. I'm going to do that later. Just for now, here I'm going to specify anchor tag and specify here Facebook, duplicate this and specify here Twitter and YouTube. Later we'll add icons instead of this text. I'm going to have the result something like this. Now just for that, here to this text box, we specify placeholder, which is search. Save this, and you can see you have your text box here. Just out of that, I wanted to align all these 3 items one by one. So to this container right here, I'm going to specify flex. You can see all these items is now aligned one by one, and then I want to center this. So I'm just going to specify here flex call items center sm flex row and sm justify between, and then I'm going to center all the text using text center class, and padding y is going to be 3. So let me explain these classes. Now when the viewport is smaller than sm breakpoint, it means when the viewport is less than 640 pixel, I want to apply these classes, this one. And if the viewport is greater than that, I want to apply this flex row, justify between, and all these classes. Now whenever I use this breakpoint, keep in mind I'm applying these classes only for the certain breakpoints. If you have the basic understanding of Tailwind, that might help you to understand how I use these classes. Now let me save these changes first. When I save this, you can see I have some space between all these items, because you can notice we have here justify between. Just out of that, to this div, I'm going to specify some class name. So I'm just going to first specify md flex none. This class is only going to apply after the medium breakpoint, means when the viewport is greater than 768 pixel. Then I'm going to say w96. So width is going to be 96. 96 means 24 rem, or you can say 384 pixel. Then I'm also going to specify order. So I'm going to say here order 2 sm order 1. So for the smaller breakpoint, I want this as a first item. Just out of that, I'm going to specify flex justify center padding y 4. It means I want to specify top and bottom padding. Then I'm going to specify sm padding y 0. I only want to apply this padding when the viewport is less than this smaller breakpoint. Otherwise, I'm going to remove this padding from this div. You can see we have this text box right here. Now, when I specify order to both these division tags, the text box will automatically move to its first position. Now, just out of that, let me just style this design section. So to this div, we specify class name, which is going to be shrink w80. It means I want to specify 20 rem, or you can say 320 pixel width to this division tag. Then I'm going to specify sm order. So this will specify the second order to this design. Just out of that, to this div right here, we specify class w96. So this is actually going to specify 24 rem width to this division tag, or you can say 384 pixel to this div. Then we specify here order 3. Then I'm going to specify flex justify center to center everything. Let me save this, and now you can see we have the actual order. Now just out of that, let me add some space between these icons. So here I'm going to specify some gap. So gap is going to be 6. Save this. Here I'm going to have some gap between these items. Now just out of that, let me just style this input text box. Here I'm going to specify class name and specify some Tailwind classes to this input text box, so we can easily style it. Margin top 1, that will add a top margin. Then specify block w means width is going to be 60. Then I'm going to add padding x3. This is going to specify left and right padding to this input text box. Then specify padding y2 to specify top and bottom padding, and then specify bg white. This is going to specify background white color to this input text box. Just out of that, I'm going to specify border. Border slate is going to be 300. I'm going to specify color to the border using this border slate class. And just out of that, I'm going to enter here, and then I'm going to specify a few other classes as well. So I'm going to specify here rounded, full. This will specify border radius to this input text box. You can see. Just out of that, we specify text sm shadow is going to be sm, and then specify here placeholder slate 500. So this class is actually going to specify color to the placeholder. Now when I save the changes, you can see I'm going to have my input text box. Now what I want, instead of adding all these classes over here, let me use the CSS. So let me just back to the styles, and right down here we have this globals. Let me open this, and here I can specify CSS styling to this input text box. Now, because I'm using only one input text box in this block, I'm adding all the styling inside this global.css file. If you have individual input text boxes in your website, you can create a new style file in the Next.js so you can specify individual styling to your component. So here I'm going to say input text, and then I'm going to specify all the classes which we have specified to this input text box. So let me cut this right from here and specify that right inside this input text. So here I'm going to first call the Tailwind apply utility class like this, and then I'm going to specify all these classes. Now what I want to apply these classes, I need to just call this input text. Let me copy this, and then I'm going to specify that here, input text. Now when I save the changes, you can see I'm going to have the same styling. Let me just back to the global CSS, and right down here, I'm just going to apply more classes here. So I'm going to say here apply and add a few more classes here. So I'm going to say focus outline none. Then we specify focus. Oops. Focus is going to be border sky 500. I'm just going to remove the outline from this input text box. As you know, whenever you click on the input text box, you will get some weird border. So I'm just going to remove that using these classes. I'm going to specify focus for the ring. So I'm going to specify ring 1, and focus is going to be ring sky 500 like this. That's it. Now if you want, you can put all these classes in the single line as well. Now because of the smaller display, I want to show all the classes, so I'm trying to put all the apply statement on the different lines. So let me just save the changes. You're not going to see anything, but when you click on this search, you can see you have this border to this input text box. Now just for that, let me just back to the header, and once I style this input text box, let me just style this second section. Let me just style this design and this Facebook icons. So let's add the icons inside this project, and also we are going to add the font families, so we can specify font family to all the text of the website. Now let me just replace this text using icons. So instead of using this text over here inside this navigation menu, I'm using icons. So let's open a new tab, and I'm going to install React icons. I'm going to search for React icon and click on this reacticon.github.io. From this website, you can use many icons. Here you have a different website icons, and you can use any of them by clicking on these tabs. So to install React icons, you have to just execute a command called npm install React icons. So let's execute this. So I'm going to open my terminal, open a new terminal, enter into the project directory, and here I'm going to say npm install React icons -- save. Once I press enter, this is going to install this React icons library in this project. Once you have this, let me just close this terminal, and right down here, if you want to use any of these icons, you have to first import that icon and then use as a component. You can see here, I'm using here these ICO moon free icons. I'm just going to choose this import statement. I'm going to copy this import statement. I'm going to import that, and instead of this icon name, you have to specify your actual icon name. I'm using Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube icon. So when I scroll down, here I'm going to have my Facebook icon. This is the YouTube icon, and this is the Twitter icon. So to copy this, just click on this icon and just press Ctrl V. That will just import that icon name like this. Just do the same for Twitter and click on the YouTube. When you click on the icon, that will automatically copy, and you can paste that icon inside the import statement. Something like this. Let me get rid of this Facebook right from here, and I'm going to use this Facebook icon. So I'm going to copy this, paste it right here, and press tab. That will add the Facebook icon in this project. You can just remove this second tag and specify here / to close this component. And you can see you have the icon here. Just for that, let me do the same thing for this Twitter and for this YouTube. Let me get rid of this closing tags, because I'm closing this something like this, because I'm using self-closing tags. Just for that, when I save the changes, you can see you have your icons. Now what I want to specify color to it. So here I'm going to specify a property called color, and the color is going to be the hex value. So I'm just going to specify color here. Save the changes. Here you can see we have this color to these icons. Now that's upon you. You can specify any hex color to these icons. I'm using here this one. Let me specify that color here like this. Save this file. Here I'm going to have my icons. Just for that, let me just back to this title right here. To this title, I'm going to specify some class name first. So I'm going to specify here class name. So first I'm going to specify here font bold, uppercase, and text 3XL. Let me save this. You can see I'm going to have the result something like this. And what I want to import the font family, the global font family to this project. So I'm going to open a new tab and search for Google font. I'm going to search for it and click on this Google font. I'm using Poppins font, so just search for it. Poppins, this one. Scroll down. I'm using regular one, so select this style. Click on the import and copy this import statement. Then you have to back to your global CSS right here, and at the top right above this tailwind you have to import this import statement. Just for that, I'm not using this HTML body. Instead I'm using my own font family. So I'm going to select all the component and select all the descendant components, and then specify here font family Poppins. So I'm going to copy this and specify that here. Now when I save the changes, you can see everything is going to change, and then I'm going to have my Poppins font family to all the text. If I open the inspect tool, you can see the navigation menu is responsive as well. Let's move and create the main section of this website. Now, once you understand how you can create the navigation menu for this website, let's take a look at how you can create the footer. So I'm going to open the header.js, and before we move to the footer and the main section, let me just wrap this anchor tags in the link component so you can easily navigate in the blog. I'm going to just import link component from next link, and then I'm going to use this as a wrapper to this anchor tag. So here I'm going to paste that link like this. Grab this anchor tag and paste that right inside this link, something like this. And to this link component, we need to specify href attribute. So just for now, I'm going to specify here /. I'm going to just specify here root route to this design. Let me just use this link tag to this social icons as well. So here I'm going to pass link, grab this anchor tag, paste that inside this link, something like this. And then to this link, we specify href attribute. So we specify here href, and inside this, I'm going to specify my social icon path. I'm just going to specify the root link to this social media icons. So here I'm going to say href and pass the root route, something like this. Now the header is successfully completed. Let me just back to the Explorer, and here we create the footer inside this component folder. So I'm going to create a new file here and name that file footer.js. And inside this file, I'm going to first create a React functional component. Let me get rid of this import statement like this. And then I'm going to save this file. Just out of that, we need this footer just out of this navigation menu. So inside this index.js right here, I'm going to import footer from the footer file. And then we pass that footer just out of this header. And I save the changes. Here I'm going to have my footer. You can notice if I change its font size using class name text 3XL, then we'll change the font size of this footer text. Now what I want between this footer and this header, right between these components right here, I want my main component. So here I'm going to say main, and here I'm going to create my main component. Let me save this. So between this header and this footer, I'm going to create my main components. Later, I'm going to show you how to create this footer. Just for now, let's create this main section. What I'm going to do is, instead of doing this, I'm going to create a layout component and put the header and footer inside it. So every time when we make a new page, we can easily access the header and the footer. Or if you want this header and the footer in all the pages, you can easily put that inside the app.js file, right inside this app component. But I'm going to recommend you to use a layout component. So let me show you how you can use it. So what I'm going to do is here inside this block, I'm going to create a new folder and name that folder layout. And inside this, I'm going to create a new file. Name that file format.js. That's upon you. You can specify any name to this file. Inside this file, I'm going to simply say export default function, and function name is format. Inside this format, I'm going to return JSX. So we're just going to print a div with layout component text. Just out of that, I'm going to back to the index.js. Right here, I'm going to import my format from the format file. And I'm going to use this format as a wrapper to this header and the footer. Like this. Instead of div, I'm using here format. Now, when I save the changes, you're only going to get the format file. This is because I use here wrapper to this header and this footer. Now, what I also want to display the child of this layout. To do that, I'm just going to first import my header and footer inside this file. So here I'm going to say import header from the header file and import footer from the footer file. Then I'm going to get rid of this division tag, and then I'm going to add my header here and the footer. And between this header and footer, I'm going to add my main component with main content. Now let me just back to the index.js, get rid of this header and the footer, get rid of this import statement as well as I'm going to remove the style as well. Save this file, back to the footer, save this file, and now you can see you have your navigation menu and the footer, and you also have your main component. Now what I want, using this layout, I'm going to specify the default title to all the pages. To do that, we need to import head from next head, and then inside this, here we need to add head like this, and then specify title to it. Title is going to be block. Now when I save the changes, you will see this block title to this page. When I save it, you can see you have this block title to this page. So this is the default title to all my pages. If you want, you can customize this head section inside a page as well. We will look at that later. Just for now, just specify the default head, and inside this main content, what I want to import my components. So instead of this hard-coded value, I'm going to call here children's as a property. So we pass here an object and then pass children, and then we pass the children inside this main content, something like this. When I save the changes, right now you're not going to see anything. This is because inside this index.js right here, we don't have any content. So if I add here h1 heading tag with main content, you can see you have your main content inside this main section. Next, we'll see how we can make the first section of this block. Now, let's make the first section of this website. Instead of this main content, I'm going to create a new section inside this format. So I'm going to open the components. Let me just close this unwanted files right from here. I'm going to open my component, and here I'm going to create a new file with the name section 1.js. That's upon you. You can specify any name to this file. Inside this file, I'm simply going to create a React functional component, something like this. Let me get rid of this import statement. Let me save this, back to the index.js, and here I'm going to import my components. So I'm going to say import section from the components section 1. So I'm going to say here section 1, and I'm going to grab that and paste that instead of this h1 heading tag, something like this. So now when I save the changes, I'm going to have this section 1 between this header and this footer. Just out of that, inside this section 1 right here, instead of this div, I'm going to say section, and then I'm going to specify some Tailwind classes here. So I'm going to first specify padding by 16, So this will specify top and bottom padding. Then I'm going to create a div inside this section and add h1 heading tag. And then I'm going to specify heading to this section, which is trending. Let me capitalize this first letter, save these changes, and here I'm going to have this trending title. Then I'm going to specify some Tailwind classes to this division tag. So let me just specify here class names, container, mx auto, md, padding x 20. So I'm just going to specify this padding x 20 when the viewport is greater than 768 pixel. Just for that, let me save this. To this h1 heading tag, I'm going to specify class name, font bold, text 4XL, padding bottom 12, and text is going to be center. So this will center this text. You can notice. Now let me first open the finished website. Inside this first section, we have this h1 heading tag with trending title, and then we have this blog post. Inside this blog post, we have the image, blog category, its title, subtitle, and the author. Let's create this section in our website. So I'm going to just back to the section 1, and right down here, I'm going to create a new blog post section. So what I want to do is, instead of adding all the blog post code right here, let's create a new function here. I'm creating this function because I'm going to iterate over this blog post using an array. So if you have to iterate over JSX, you have to put that in the function. So you can iterate over this JSX and pass different values to it. I'm going to say here function, and I'm going to name it slide, because I'm going to put this function in the swiper slider. I'm going to specify function name slide. Later we'll understand how we can add swiper inside the first section. Just for now, let's specify here slide and pass here a function. Then I'm going to return JSX. So we pass here return statement and create a division tag here. And then I'm going to call this slide something like this. Now inside this function, I'm going to create two columns. In the first column, we have this image, and in the second column, we have this information. So here I'm using grid layout. So I'm going to specify class name, then specify grid. So this is going to specify display grid to this division tag, and then I'm going to specify md grid calls to. So I'm just informing that after the md breakpoint, means after the medium size of devices, after 768 pixel, I want two columns. And if the viewport is less than that, I want only one column. Just out of that, inside this div, here I'm going to create two columns. So I'm going to create two division tags here, like this. The first division tag is for image. So we pass here class name image, and the second division tag is for the blog information. So we pass here info. Inside this first div right here, I'm going to add the image component. So we pass here image. So we're first going to import the Next.js image component. Instead of using img in Next.js, we have an image component. So we pass here import image from next image, and I'm using this image right here. So I'm going to say here image like this, and to this image I'm going to pass source. Now because I don't have any image right now, I'm going to leave this source as it is, and then I'm going to pass here width. Width is going to be 600, means 600 pixel, and height is going to be 600 pixel. Now if you remove both these properties from this image component, then that is going to return an error message. Let me show you. If I remove this width and height, you can see image missing requires source property. If I specify here some source property, something like this, then you can notice with source, you must use width and height, or you can use layout fill property. So whenever you use image component, you have to pass width and height or layout fill. So let me just pass here width and height. Let me save this. So that will just solve this problem. I want to specify image to this source. To specify that, we need to first import images inside this project. So what I'm going to do is, inside this public folder right here, inside this public folder, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to name that folder images. And inside these images, I'm going to put all the images of this project. Don't worry, you can download all these images from this 04 section 1 Git branch. So you have to first open your terminal and check out in 04 section 1 Git branch. So now once you check in inside this section 1, you need to just check out your public folder, and inside that you have images. So once you have your images, Let me just use that in this project. To use image in the Next.js, you need to specify the relative path to the public folder. So if you have images inside this public folder, then you have to just specify here a /, then specify your images folder, and then you specify your image. So inside these images right here, you can see inside these images we have this img1.jpg. So I'm going to specify that here, img1.jpg. Let me just save this. You can see I'm going to have my image in the Next.js application. Next.js will automatically optimize this image. Now, just out of that, once you have your image, let me just grab this image and put that inside a link component. So when we click on the image, we can easily navigate a user to the blog post. At the top here, I'm going to say import link from the Next.js link. And I'm going to say here link. Inside that, we have an anchor wrapper, the anchor tag wrapper. And then I'm going to specify href attribute, which is going to be the route route. Later, we'll specify the route path to this href attribute. Just for now, I'm going to leave this as it is. Grab this image, cut this right from here and pass that between this anchor tag like this. Let me save this. So now when I hover on this image, you can see we have this hand icon. And now when you click on this image, it will navigate you to the route route. Just for that, inside this info right here, we first add the category. So we create here a div with the class name category. So I'm just going to pass here cat. Then I'm going to add here link component and add href attribute to it. It's going to be the default route route. Just out of that, I'm going to add here an anchor tag, something like this. And inside this anchor tag, right inside it, I'm going to specify the categories. So I'm going to just specify here business and travel category. This is just a hard-coded value. When we access the data from the database, I'm going to replace this value with the database value. Just for now, I'm going to leave this as it is. Now let me just save this. Oops, something went wrong. You can notice Next.js is going to return an error message. Multiple children were passed to the link component. Only one child is supported in the link component. If you check out this link component carefully, then you can notice you only have one child, but you're still going to get an error message. This is because you have this space here. Link component is going to consider this space as another component. So in Next.js, when you use link component, you have to take care this thing as well. So just get rid of this white space, save this file and reload it. Now you can see you have your category. Just out of that, to this category, we specify some classes. So I'm going to specify some classes here. Text orange 600 and hover text orange 800. Something like this. When I save the changes, you can see we have the text orange category. Just out of that, let me copy this link component and paste that just down here. And instead of this business travel, I'm going to get rid of this business travel and pass here a publish date. So I'm going to say here hyphen July 3 and 2022. I'm going to get the publish date as well. And then I'm going to change this color. So I'm going to just change this color to gray 800 and gray 600. Save this. You can see I'm going to have this gray color to this publish date. Now just out of that, let me create this title, this description and the author. So I'm just going to create here, just out of this div. Here I'm going to add another div and I'm going to name this div title. And here I'm going to add a link component with href attribute. Inside this, I'm just going to pass default route route. And then I'm going to add here an anchor tag. And inside this anchor tag, I'm going to put some text. So I'm going to just copy this title and paste that right inside this anchor tag. Let me save this. Here I'm going to have my title. Just out of that, to this anchor tag, I'm going to specify some class names. So I'm just going to first specify text3xl. This will increase the size of this title. Save this. Then I'm going to specify md text6xl. So after the medium size of devices, I want this font size. When I save the changes, you can see it's going to change the font size of this title. Then just out of this 6xl, we specify font bold, text gray 800 and hover is going to be text gray 600. Save this. Here I'm going to have my title, you can see. And just out of this title, we create a paragraph for the description. And here I'm going to copy this description and paste that here. When I save the changes, I'm going to have the description. Let me just specify some classes to it, some Tailwind classes. So we pass here class name, text gray 500, as well as we pass padding y 3. This will specify top and bottom padding. And right down here, we pass the author. Later we'll create this author section, but just for now, I'm going to add here h1 heading tag with author. Save this. And as you can see, the first section is nearly ready. Now, just for that, I want to center this content. To center this to this info right here, we pass flex, justify center, and then I'm going to change the direction. So we pass flex column. Save this. This will center this section, something like this. Now, let's take a look at how we can create this author in our blog. So I'm going to back to the slide in the section 1, and right down here, you can see we just added here h1 heading tag to display the author name. Instead of this h1 heading tag, I'm going to create a new component and put that component instead of this h1 heading tag. I'm going to open the Explorer, and inside this component right here, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to name that folder child and press enter. Now inside this folder, I'm going to create all the components which are child to the main component. For example, section 1 is the main component, or you can say the parent component. And inside this section 1, I'm going to add a new component. So we put this component in the dedicated folder. So I'm going to create a folder called child, and inside that, I'm going to create this author. So we can use this author anywhere in the project in the different components. So inside this child, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to name this file author.js. And then I'm going to create here React functional component like this. And then I'm going to get rid of this import statement right here. Let me save these changes. Back to the section 1 at the top. Let me get rid of this unwanted space. And at the top here, I'm going to say import author from the child folder. And then I'm going to add here author. Let me copy this. Instead of this h1 heading tag, here I'm going to paste my author component. Something like this. Let me save these changes. And here I'm going to have my author. Now what I want, I'm going to just create author inside this file. So to this div, let me specify some classes first. So we first specify custom class, which is author, then specify flex and padding y 5. So this will add top and bottom padding to this div. Then I'm going to add here an image of author. So I'm going to add here image component. So we need to first import that. So import image from the next image. Then I'm going to call here image component of Next.js, and then I'm going to say here src, and then I'm going to specify some classes to this image, which is class name is equal to rounded full. So this class is going to specify border radius to this image. Now to the source, I need to specify the source of the author. So if I open the image folder inside this public, then you can notice we have this author folder here. Inside this author, we have this author1.jpg. So we need to pass this path right here. So I'm going to pass here /, then specify images, / again. Inside that, we have author, and inside that, we have author1.jpg. Let me save the changes, and you can see I'm going to have an error message that you must use width and height to this image component. So what I'm going to do is to this image component, here I'm going to specify width, which is going to be 60 pixel, and height is going to be 60 pixel. Let me save this. And now when I reload the browser, I'm going to have my author here. Just for that, I need the author name and its designation. So I'm going to add here a div with flex class, and just out of this flex, I'm going to specify flex column. Then I'm going to specify justify center, padding x4. This is going to specify left and right padding. And inside this div right here, I'm going to first add the link component. So I'm going to say here link. We need to first import this link component at the top. Here I'm going to say import link from next link. And then I'm going to specify here href attribute. It's going to be the root route. I'm not going to specify any route right now. And inside this, I'm going to add an anchor tag, something like this. You need to remove this white space. And then to this anchor tag, I'm going to specify some class names. So we first specify text MD. We specify the size of the font. Then I'm going to specify font bold. Then I'm going to specify here text gray 800 and hover text gray 600. And inside this anchor tag right here, I'm going to specify the name of the user. So I'm just going to specify here any name. Just out of that, just out of this link component right down here, I'm going to display the designation of the author. Let me first save the changes and show you the result. You can see I'm going to have the author name. So right down here, I'm going to add a span tag and then add some classes to it first. So class name is going to be text sm. I'm going to specify font size first and then specify text gray 500. And inside the span tag, I'm going to specify the designation, which is CEO and founder. Let me save this. You can see I'm going to have my author component. Just out of that, in the finished website, you can see on the right side, I have this background image. So let me just add that. So I'm going to back to the section 1, right up here to this section 1, I have the background image. So to add this image, you need to scroll up, and to this section, I'm going to specify style. And to this style, I'm going to specify the background image. Instead of adding CSS, I'm going to create here a constant variable. I'm going to say here constant bg is equal to background image is equal to, then specify here background, specify colon, and in the double quote, I'm going to specify the URL of the image. So I have this background image in the images folder. Inside that, we have banner.png file. I'm just going to use that. And then I'm going to say here, no repeat. I don't want to repeat this image. So I'm going to pass here, no repeat. After that, I'm going to specify CSS property called background position. It's going to be right. And then I'm going to specify this variable right here. So we're just going to pass bg, something like this. I'm going to save the changes. Oops, something went wrong. Yeah, I just specify here semicolon. Just remove it and pass comma, because this is a type of object. This is not a CSS. It's a type of object. Let me save this. Here you can see I'm going to have my background image here. Now what I want in my website, I want this first section in the slider. If I back to my finished website, then you can see I can slide this first section. So I'm just going to wrap this first section in the slider. So let's see how we can do it. Now let's take a look at how we can put this slide inside a slider. So when the user opens the website, you can see the automatic slider. So what we need to do is we need to just grab this slide and put that inside a slider. So in this course, I'm using a swiper slider. So I'm just going to search for swiper slider and click on this swiperjs.com. Swiper is one of the most popular and modern slider. Swiper slider can use with many frameworks, just like React, Svelte, Vue, Angular, and so on. So let's take a look at how you can use this slider in Next.js. So I'm going to click on this get started. You can see to use this slider, you need to first install this slider using npm command. So I'm going to copy this command back to my project, open a new terminal, enter into my project, and here I'm going to execute a command called npm install swiper. And I press enter. This is going to install the swiper library in the project. Once I have it, just out of that, you can see you need to import that library in the project. And then you can use that library by creating a new instance of it. Now you can use this technique in the vanilla JavaScript. Now as you know, we are working with Next.js. So instead of this documentation, you need a documentation for React, or you can say for Next.js. To see that documentation, just back to the Swiper homepage, and here you can notice you have these frameworks. Just click on this React. You have this React documentation. You can see we already installed the Swiper. Just out of that, you have to export two components. First is Swiper, and second is Swiper slide. Using this import statement, you can import both these components. So I'm just going to copy it and import that at the top, right up here. After that, you also need styling. So import the Swiper style as well. So I'm going to copy and paste the style as well. And just out of that, inside your component, you need to create a Swiper component, something like this. And inside that, you have a child component called Swiper slides. These are all your slides. Let me just copy this default code and paste it in my section 1. Before this slide, right up here, I'm going to paste this code, something like this. Now let me just align this code properly. Now let me just save the changes. Back to my project. And you can see I'm going to have this slider. It's super easy, right? To add this slider in the Next.js application. Now, if you want to add more slides, you can copy and paste these components. That's upon you. Now, what I want, instead of this slide 1, slide 2, I want my slide function. So I'm going to get rid of all these slides. And instead of this slide 1, I'm going to grab this slide, this code, and put that right here. Just for that, I'm going to duplicate this statement multiple times. Let me save this. You can see I'm going to have my slide here. But what I want only one slide per page. So when you back to the swiper, then you can notice you have some properties here. Space between, slides per view, and these are some events. Here you can notice you have this slide per view. What I want only one slide per view. So I'm going to pass here 1. Let me save this. I'm going to have one slide per view. Just for that, if you want to do some extra work with your slide, then you can use this onSlideChange event. Or you can also use this onSwiper. If you open your console, then you can notice when you reload it, when you swipe, you have this slide change console message. You're also going to have this swiper. Now I'm not using both these properties, so let me get rid of it. I'm also going to remove this first space between. Now just for that, I want to specify automatic sliding to this slider. I'm going to just pass a property here to this swiper, which is auto play is equal to, and then pass here an object. And inside this object, you have another object, and inside this, you specify the delay 2000. Means after every 2 seconds, I want to slide this block. Let me save this and show you the result. Oops, something went wrong. So what you have to do is, you have to use the swiper core module. To automatically slide this slider, you have to use swiper core modules. So you have to import swiper core from swiper. And with this swiper core, you have to add auto play as well. And then inside your function right here, you call swiper core dot use. You're going to telling the swiper that use this middleware and add autoplay slide. So I'm going to call here autoplay in the array. And now when I reload the browser, you can see after every 2 seconds, swiper is going to automatically slide this slider. You can also loop over this slider using loop property. Loop property is going to be true. If you specify loop true, then this will loop over and over again to the slides. You can find these properties inside the documentation of swiper. Right inside this documentation, you can find all the properties right here. Now, once you understand how you can use a slider, next I'm going to show you how you can create this latest post section. In the previous lecture, we understand how to make this first section of this website. Let's take a look at how we can create this second section. Inside this section, I'm going to create the latest post. Here we have different posts of the blog. You can notice I'm using here grid to create these 3 columns and make it completely responsive using Tailwind CSS. So I'm going to just back to my website. Let me just close these files. And I'm going to create a new file inside a component right here. Inside this component folder, I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to name it section2.js. As you know, this is the first section and now we are creating this second section. So inside this section 2, let me first create a React functional component and get rid of this first import statement. And now let me save this back to the index.js. And here we need to add that section. So I'm going to say import section 2. Let me just specify here capital S. So we can call a component inside this JSX like this. When I save the changes, back to my website, when I scroll down here, I'm going to have the second section. Now let's make this second section. So instead of this div, we pass here section tag, and to this section we specify first class name. Specify here container mx auto md padding x 20. So I'm going to just add padding x 20 when the viewport is greater than 768 pixel. and then we pass padding y 10. Just so that inside this section we have a title, so I'm going to create h1 heading tag here. I'm going to pass latest post title. Save this, and here you can see I have this latest post title here. Let me specify some Tailwind classes to it. So I'm going to specify font bold, then I'm going to specify text for Excel. Save this. Here I'm going to have this title, then padding y is going to be 12 and text center. Save this. So here you can notice I'm going to have this latest post. Just out of that, after this latest post, right down here, I'm going to create a grid columns. So right down here, I'm going to create a div, and to this div, we specify class name. So we first specify grid. So this class is going to specify display grid to this division tag. It means inside this div, I'm going to have columns. Just out of that, I'm going to say here md grid calls 2. It means when the viewport is greater than medium size of devices, I want 2 columns. If the viewport is for large devices, I'm going to say grid calls 3. I want 3 columns. And if the viewport is for medium size of devices or less than that, I'm going to add only 1 column using this grid class. Just out of that, here we need gap as well. So gap is going to be 14. Right inside this div, I'm going to have my blocks. So instead of creating a new block here, let me create here a function. So we can iterate over this function and generate different blocks. I'm going to specify function name post, return JSX. So we pass here return statement, and we need to call this right up here, something like this. In the return statement right here, I'm going to return a div with item class, and inside this I have my image, or you can say my images. Then I have the info division tag. To this info division tag, we have some Tailwind classes. So we first have flex justify center to center all the text, and flex column. Along with that, I'm going to add padding y 4. Let me just save this. You're not going to get anything. Now instead of creating image tag and this title information, I'm going to just back to the first section. You can notice here I have this code. Let me just copy this. I'm going to copy this link component and paste that in the second section right inside these images. And then I'm going to change few properties here. What I'm going to do is change this width, which is going to be 500, and this became 350. And then I'm going to specify class name to this image, which is rounded. Just out of that, inside this info, I'm going to copy my categories. So here I'm going to copy this div and specify that inside this info, like this. Just out of that, I'm going to back to the section 1 again, copy this title section, paste that down here, copy this paragraph and this author, and paste that just down here. When I save the changes, I'm going to get some errors. This is because I don't have this link component inside this project, as well as I don't have this image component as well. So at the top here, I'm going to first say import link from next link and import image from next image. Save this. Just out of that, I'm going to have an error in the author section because I don't have author imported in this file. I'm going to get this error. So let me just import this, import author from the child folder. So I'm going to call here an author. Save this, reload the browser. When I scroll down, here you can see I'm going to have my first block. Now I just wanted to change few CSS classes of this first block. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down, and to this title, instead of this text 3XL, I'm going to pass here only XL. And I'm going to get rid of this MD class as well. Save this. I'm going to have the result something like this. That's it. Let me save this. Here I'm going to have my first post. Let me just duplicate this. So here I'm going to duplicate this statement multiple times. And this is my result. You can see I'm going to have all my posts. So we have 6 posts. So I'm going to generate this 6 posts here. So that's super easy to generate multiple posts. later when we get the data from the external source, instead of duplicating this post, I'm going to iterate over this post using an array of object. When we have the backend data, instead of duplicating this post, I'm going to iterate over this post inside the map function. And using that post, we can specify different values to this image and to this text. Just for now, just leave everything as it is and move to the next section. Now, once you understand how you can create the latest post of this blog, let's take a look at how you can create the next most popular section. Inside this section, I'm going to create 2 columns, grid layout, and put my popular post here. And we're also going to add this post in the swiper slider. So we can slide this post and navigate to different posts. So let's create this. Let me back to my website, and here I'm going to create a new section. So I'm going to create a new file here. Name this file section 3.js. Inside this third section, I'm going to create a React functional component. Get rid of this import statement, save this file, back to the index.js. Here you can notice I have 2 sections here. So let's add and import this third section. So we pass here section 3 like this, copy this and paste that right down here. Save this file. Just for that, I'm going to back to the section 3. Instead of this div, as you know, I'm going to create here a section tag, and to this section tag we specify some Tailwind classes. So we first specify container mx auto, then md is going to be padding x 20 and padding y 16. Just for that, I'm going to copy the title of the second section, this one, and paste that inside this third section. Instead of this latest post, now I'm going to say most popular. Let me save this, back to my website, and here I'm going to have this title, most popular. Just for that, just for this h1 heading tag right down here, I'm going to create my swiper. So what we need to do is we need to first import the swiper. So at the top here we say import swiper from swiper React and swiper slide. We need 2 components from this swiper, and then here we need to say swiper, and inside this we have different slides. So we're just going to say swiper slide. So this is going to create a first slide inside this swiper. Just for that, as you know, we need to pass some properties to this swiper. So I'm going to back to the first section, scroll up, and you can see we have some properties here. So let me just specify this slides per view property to this section 3. So what we are going to do is, instead of 1, I'm going to specify here slides per view 2. So what I want 2 slides per view. Just for that, inside this swiper slide right down here, I'm going to create this post. So to create this post, I'm going to back to the section 2, and right down here you can notice we have this post function. I'm going to copy this and paste that inside this third section like this. And then, as you know, we need to first import the link and image component inside this page as well. So at the top, I'm going to say import link from the next link and import image from the next image. And we also need to import author from the child author file. Just for that, I'm going to just use this post inside this slide. So we pass here parenthesis and pass the function post, something like this. Let me just save these changes. When I save it, you can see you're going to have the result something like this. Now, just out of that, inside this post, we need to change few things. So instead of this item, I'm going to rename this and specify here grid. Just out of that, to this image, I'm going to change this width and height. So this width is going to be 600 and height is now going to be 400. And then I'm going to remove this class name, which is rounded, right from here. And just for that, I'm going to leave everything as it is, but just change this title. Instead of text XL, we pass here text 3XL and MD text 4XL. Save this. So here I'm going to have my title and everything goes the same. When I scroll up, if I create a new slide here, Save the changes. Here I'm gonna have the second slide. You can see. Let me create multiple slides here. Save this file. And you can see we have different slides here. So that's super easy, right? To create different slides in this blog application. So now I hope you understand how to make this most popular post section of this blog. Next, we'll see how we can make this category section. Here we're going to categorize business and travel post. In the previous section, we created this most popular section of this website. Let's take a look at how we can create this next section, which is going to be the fourth section of this blog. Here, I'm going to categorize all the posts. We can just categorize the business and travel post in the different columns. So let's take a look at how we can create this design. So I'm going to just open the Explorer tab, and inside these components right here, I'm going to create a new file. Name this file section4.js. As you know, we already have section 1, 2, and 3. So let's create a section 4. Create here React functional component like this, and then get rid of this import statement. Just are that. Let me save this back to the index.js. Here I'm going to say import, and I'm going to import section 4 like this, and then I'm going to import this component inside this home page. Save this file back to the project, and when I scroll down here, you can see I have this section 4. So just are that inside this function, let me create the section 4. So I'm going to get rid of this div, and here I'm going to say section, and then specify some classes to it. I'm going to specify some Tailwind classes. So as you know, in the previous section right here, I just specify a few classes here. Container, then I'm going to specify MX Auto, MD, and padding Y. I'm going to specify the same classes to this section. Just so that inside this section, I'm going to create two columns. As you can see here, we have the business and this travel column. So we create two columns inside this container. So I'm going to say here grid. I'm going to create a div with the class grid, and I'm going to say LG grid calls 2. So after the large devices, I want two columns to this division tag. And if the viewport is less than this LG device, means if the viewport is less than 1024 pixel, I want only one column. Just out of that, inside this div, here I'm going to create first column. So we pass here item, and this is going to be the second column. So we pass class name to this div, which is item. In the first column right here, I'm going to copy this h1 heading tag, this one, and then paste that here. And instead of most popular, this is going to be the business category. Let me just get rid of this text center. Just out of that, just out of this h1 heading tag, I'm going to create a flex class, and to this flex, I'm going to specify flex column, and gap is going to be 6. Inside this first div, here, I'm going to add my post. So to create a post, I'm going to create a new function for that. So I'm going to say here function post like this, and inside this post here, I'm going to return JSX. So we first return a div with some Tailwind classes. So I'm going to say here flex gap 5. After that, inside this div, I'm going to create two columns. First for the image and second for the blog information. So we first say here image, and to this image, I'm going to specify flex column, justify start. Just out of that, inside this div, I'm going to copy this image right from here and paste that inside this fourth section. Just out of that, let me change this width and height. So instead of 600, now I'm going to put 300 width, and height is going to be 250. Along with that, I want to add a class name, which is going to be rounded. So this class is going to specify border radius to this image. Just out of that, just out of this div, right down here, I'm going to create a div with the class name info. And then I'm going to specify here flex, justify center, flex call, and then inside this div, here I'm going to add my category, title, and author. So to add that, I'm going to back to the section 3, and here you can notice we have this category, the title, and the author. So let me first copy this title and the category, paste that right here, back to the section 3 and copy this author. And I'm going to paste that in the section 4, right down here. And at the top, you need to first import this author. So I'm going to say here import author from the author file. And just out of that, we also need to add here link component, and we need to add here image component from Next.js. Just out of that, let me save the changes, scroll up, and here we need to call this post inside this div, just like this. When I save the changes, you can see right down here I have my data. Now let me just change this title, and I'm going to specify here text Excel and get rid of this MD text for Excel. Save this. Here you can see I'm going to have my first categorized blog post. Just out of that, I can duplicate this 2 or 3 more times. Then I'm going to have all my categories. You can see. Just out of that, to create the next category, you can just copy this h1 heading tag, and inside this item, you can paste that h1 heading tag. Instead of business, you can specify your category, which is travel. And I'm going to copy this function and paste that here. Save this file. You can see my travel categories is also created. But now you can see I have this gap between this item. So let me just specify this gap to this item. To do that, you need to create a division tag and wrap these functions inside it. So I'm going to grab this, say here flex, then specify flex column, and gap is going to be 6. Let me paste my functions like this, save this, and now you can see you successfully build the 4th section of the blog. Next, we'll talk about how you can make this footer of this website. Now, once you understand how you can categorize your post, let's take a look at how you can make this footer of this website. Inside this footer, we're going to have subscribe newsletter section. I'm going to have this background image and some copyright information. So let me show you how you can create the footer for this website. When I scroll down, here is my footer. So as you know, you don't have to create a new file for the footer because we already have the footer file inside these components. Let me open that. Here we have the footer. Let me just get it out this div, and instead of div, we pass here footer, the component name. And inside this, let me first specify some classes to this footer. So we first specify bggray50 to this footer, and then inside this footer right here, I'm going to create a div, specify some classes to it. So we pass container, mx auto, then flex, justify center, and at the end we pass padding by 12. Inside this div right here, I'm going to add a div again and specify class padding by 5. So this will just add space between this division tag. Just out of that, I'm going to add here flex box. So I'm going to say here flex, and inside this flex, I'm going to have my icons. So let me first specify classes to it. Gap is going to be 6, and justify center to center all the icons. And inside this div, I'm going to have my icons. When you scroll up, you can notice I'm going to have this icon code. Let me just copy this code and paste that right down here. So I'm going to back to the header. Let me just copy this link components right from here, and I'm going to paste that in the footer right inside this div. And as you know, we need to import these components as well as the link component. So I'm going to copy both these import statement and specify that in the footer, something like this. Just out of that, let me close this header. Just out of this division tag right down here, I'm going to add a paragraph, and then I'm going to specify some text here. And then to this paragraph, I'm going to specify class names. So I'm going to say here class names, padding by 5, and text gray 400. Out of this paragraph, I'm going to create another paragraph, and then I'm going to add here terms and condition. Let me just specify here class names. So I'm going to specify text gray 400, and text is going to be center. Let me just save the changes. When I scroll down, you can see I'm going to have my footer. Just out of that, what we need to add this background image and this subscribe newsletter section inside this footer. To add that, I'm going to create a new component inside this child right here, I'm going to create a new component and I'm going to name that component newsletter.js. And inside this newsletter.js file, let me create a newsletter function first. So I'm going to say here export default function, which is going to be newsletter. And just out of that, here I'm going to return JSX. Here I'm going to call the section tag, and then I'm going to specify some classes to it. So we first specify bg gray 50, then specify margin top 20. And inside this section right here, we create a div, specify some classes to it. So we first specify container, mx auto, md, padding x 20, and padding y 16. As well as I'm going to center all the text. So we pass here text center. Inside this div, here I'm going to add h1 heading tag and specify subscribe newsletter. And then I'm going to specify some classes here. So we first specify font bold, then specify text 3XL. Let me save the changes and show you the result first. So let me just back to the footer. At the top right here, I'm going to say import newsletter from the child newsletter file. Let me just specify here newsletter, copy it and paste that inside this footer at the top before this division tag right up here. Let me save the changes, and here you can see subscribe newsletter title. Oops, I think I misspelled here. So let me just back to the newsletter and I'm going to specify here newsletter. Just out of that, out of this h1 heading tag right down here, let me create here a div, and to this div we specify some classes. So I'm going to specify here class name, padding y 4, and inside this div I'm going to add input text box. So we pass here input of the type text box and then add some classes. So here I'm going to say shadow, then I'm going to specify border to it. So I'm going to say border, then add rounded class, width is going to be 9 by 12, means it is equal to 75%. Padding y is going to be 3 and padding x is going to be 3. And I'm going to specify here text gray 700. Then I'm going to specify focus, outline none, and then I'm also going to remove the shadow. So we pass here focus, shadow, outline. Let me save the changes, and here you can see I'm going to have this text box. Let me just specify placeholder to it. So we pass here placeholder, which is going to be enter your email. Let me save this. Here we have the placeholder. Just out of that, just out of this input text box, just out of this div right down here, I'm going to add a button and specify here some classes. Before I add and specify classes, let me just specify here subscribe text, and inside this class name I'm going to say bg orange 400. So we first specify the background color, then add padding x 20, then I'm going to add padding y 3, rounded is going to be full, and text gray 50. Along with that, I'm going to say text XL. Let me save the changes. Here you can see I'm going to have my subscribe button. Now just out of that, I want to specify background image to this footer, just like this. So what I'm going to do is inside this footer right here, I'm going to create an object, and I'm going to say constant bg is equal to, and then specify an object here. So inside this object, I'm going to first specify background image, and to this object I'm going to specify CSS properties. So I'm going to say here background image is going to be in the double quote URL. In the single quote I'm going to say / images and footer.png. I'm going to specify the file path right inside this background image CSS property. Just out of that, I'm going to say background repeat is going to be no repeat. Out of that, we specify background position, which is going to be bottom left. Just out of that, to this footer, I'm going to specify style and then specify this variable, which is bg, this one. Save this. Here you can see I'm going to have my background image to this footer. You can notice now the home page is successfully created. Next, I'm going to show you how I can make the blog page. Once you understand how you can make this home page of this blog, let's take a look at how you can create the blog page. Now, if you try to click on this blog title, you're going to navigate to the blog post. And here you have all the details of this blog. And I'm going to create this page inside the post directory. And you can see the ID of this blog is 1. If I change this ID to 2, then you can see you're going to have your second blog. If I change this to 3, you're going to get your third blog. And we are going to pass this path to the link component, so we can navigate through different blogs. So let's take a look at how we can create this blog page. So let me just back to my project. Now to create a blog page, you have to create a new file inside this pages folder, because we are creating a new route. So we create a new file inside this pages, and we first create a folder, and I'm going to name this folder post. You can specify any name to this folder, that's upon you. And then inside this post, I'm going to create a file with the name page.js. Just for now, I'm going to specify file name page.js. Later, we'll understand how we can convert this file into dynamic routes. Just for the design, I'm going to create a file page.js. And here I'm going to export a default function. So I'm going to say here export default function. And I'm going to name this function page. Get rid of the parameter and this parenthesis value. And then I'm going to return here a JSX. So we pass here div and say page. Let me save these changes. Then I'm going to back to my project. And here I'm going to say / post page and press enter. You can see you're going to have your page. Now because inside this post directory, we have the page.js file, we specify that file name as a route. In Next.js, as you know, the file name becomes the route. Let me just toggle this window on the right side, something like this. And now let me create this blog page. What I have to do is I want my header and the footer. So to get the header and footer, you need this layout component. This one. Inside this layout component, as you know, you have header and footer. So to get that, at the top, right up here, you say import format from, and then specify here // then again specify // and then specify here layout component, and inside that you have format. And then I'm going to get rid of this div and specify here format like this. Let me save this. You can see I'm going to have my header and the footer, and inside this we have the page title. Just for that, inside this page right here, I'm going to create a new section. So I'm going to say here section. I'm going to first specify here some Tailwind classes. So specify here class name container mx auto, then specify md padding x2. Then I'm going to specify padding by 16. That will add top and bottom padding, and add width 1/2. It means width is going to be 50%. Just for that, inside this section, I'm going to first add the author section. So I'm going to create here a div, specify some classes here, flex, justify, center, and inside this, I'm going to call my author component. As you know, we need to first import this author at the top. Here I'm going to say import author from // and then specify here components. Inside that we have child, and inside that we have author. When I save the changes, you can see I'm going to have my author here. Just out of that, just out of this div, right down here, I'm going to create my post. So I'm going to create here a div with the title post with padding by 10. So this will add top and bottom padding. And then here I'm going to say h1 and then specify title of the blog post. So just for now, if I copy and paste some text here, when I save the changes, you can see I'm going to have this title. Just out of that, let me just specify some classes here. So class name is going to be font bold, text for Excel, and text is going to be center at the document. Save the changes. Here I'm going to have the result. Just out of that, I also want padding bottom 5. So this will add bottom padding to this title. Just out of that, just out of this title, right down here, I'm going to add a paragraph and specify some text to it. So I'm going to copy this text and specify that inside this paragraph. Save the changes, and here I'm going to have this title. Let me just grab this title and specify that right here. Instead of this big title, let me specify a small title here. Save this. Here I'm going to have my title and the paragraph. To this paragraph, I'm going to specify some Tailwind classes. So I'm going to back to the paragraph and specify here classes. So here I'm going to say text gray 500, text Excel, and text center. Let me save the changes. Here I'm going to have the result. Just out of that, just out of this paragraph, right down here, I'm going to add my image. So let me first add padding by 10 here. And then I'm going to add my image component. So before I add image component, as you know, you need to first import here, import image from the next image. And then here I'm going to say image, specify here source attribute. And in the source attribute, I'm going to copy the path of this image, specify the relative path here. Then don't forget to add width, which is going to be 900, and height is going to be 600 pixel. Let me save this. You can see I'm going to have my image. Just out of that, just out of this image right down here, I'm going to have my content. So I'm going to say here content to this div. Let me specify some text. So we pass here text gray 600, then text LG, the font size, then specify flex column, and gap is going to be 4. Just out of that, inside this, we have a different paragraph. Let me just copy and paste some content here. Something like this. So I'm going to copy and paste some content here. So this is the description of this blog. And as you can see, the blog page is now completed. When I scroll down, what I want here, I want component. In the finish website, when I scroll down at the bottom, we have here a related component. Let's see how we can make this component in the blog. Now, once you understand how you can make this blog page, let's take a look at how we can create this related component inside this blog page. So what I'm going to do is inside my components, right inside these components right here, I'm going to create a new file inside this child, and I'm going to name this file related.js. Now this one you can specify any name to this file. And here I'm going to export a default function, and I'm going to name this function related, get rid of this parameter and the content. Right here, I'm going to say return, and return a division tag with related text. Let me save this. Back to my page. At the top, right up here, I'm going to say import related from the components child. Just out of that, I'm going to copy this related and specify that at the bottom. Just out of this division tag, right down here. Save these changes. When I scroll down, here you can see we have this related title. Let me just back to the component, and right here, let me create this component. So to make this component, I'm going to first create here a section tag and then specify class name, which is going to be padding top 20. And then I'm going to specify here h1 heading tag. Instead of creating a new h1 heading tag, I'm going to open this fourth section of this website. So I'm going to click on this section 4, and you can see you have all your content here. You can just copy this h1 heading tag and then specify here inside this related content right here. Instead of business, you're now going to pass related. Instead of 4XL, here we pass 3XL, and padding bar is going to be 10. After that, just out of this h1, I'm going to create here a div with flex class, and here I'm going to say flex column, and gap is going to be 10. Just out of that, inside this, I'm going to create these components. So to create this, we need to first create a function so we can iterate over these objects. So down here, I'm going to create a function post, and then I'm going to return JSX here. Inside this, we create a div with the flex class, and then specify here gap 5. And right down here inside this div, we first need this image. So I'm going to back to the section 4, scroll down. Here I have this code of this image. Let me copy this, paste it right inside this div. As you know, we don't have this link and this image component. So at the top, we need to say here import link from the next link and import image from the next image. Just out of that, once we have the image, we need the blog information. So I'm going to back to the section 4 again. I'm going to copy this div completely and paste that right down here. Let me save this and back to the top. Here inside this div, I'm going to add this post function. When I save the changes, I'm going to have some error here. This is because the author is not there. So to get the author, we need to first import here author like this. Save this, scroll down. Here you have your first component. Now just for that, let me change few things here. Instead of height 250, I'm going to pass here height 200. So I'm just going to decrease the height of this image. Just for that, I'm going to leave everything as it is, scroll up and duplicate this function. You can see the related component is now created. When we get the data from the backend, this component looks amazing. Now, once you understand how you can make the front end using JSX and Tailwind in Next.js application, let's take a look at how you can create the backend. Don't worry, you don't have to create a new project for the backend. So what we are going to do is we are creating an API to get the data from the backend. To do that, I'm using here a pages folder, and inside that you can see we have this folder called API. Here we create an API to access the data of the backend, and then we pass that data to the components. So let's take a look at how you can create the API. When you open the API folder, you can see here you have the hello.js file. If you open this file, you can notice you have the default export function, and this function is going to return a response with the status code 200 with the JSON data. If you open your website and if you head on to API hello, when you press enter, then you can notice you're going to have this file data as a response. So if you make a GET request to this endpoint, you will get this data. So this API folder is going to make this hello endpoint, and this endpoint is going to return this data. In this project, we are creating different endpoints to access the backend data. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new data file inside this API folder. Instead of getting the data from the database, I'm going to make a mimic of the database using a data.js file. So inside this API here, I'm going to create a new file and name this file data.js. Using this file, I'm going to mimic a backend data. So I'm going to grab some data and put that inside this file, something like this. So I'm going to just put some backend data inside this file. So you can see inside this file we have an array of object, and inside this object we have different properties. I'm using these properties to pass value to the front end. Now you don't have to worry about this data. You can download this file when you check out inside the API branch. So you have to just clone this project and check out inside this 12_API branch. When you check out inside this branch, you can download this data.js file. Now just for that, once you have your backend data, you have to access this data and create an API. You can see how easy it is to make the backend mimic. We just need to create a data.js file and export an object, and this object is going to have all the data of this project. Now if you want, you can put this data in the backend database as well, just like in the MongoDB or in the SQL. But don't worry, in the next project of Next.js, I'm going to show you how you can make the employee management using a backend database. So don't worry about that. You will learn everything step by step. Just consider this as a backend mimic. So you have your data. If you want, you can move this file inside the pages as well, or somewhere else inside a database folder as well. That's upon you. Just for this example, I'm going to put this in the API folder. Now because this is just a mimic of backend data, I'm going to put this data.js file inside this API. Once you download this data.js file, save it back to the API, and here I'm going to create a new endpoint. When you create a new file inside this API, that became the endpoint of the API. So when you create a new file, so I'm going to just create a new file and I'm going to name this trending.js. Now this file name is now became the endpoint. So what we need to do is we need to create this handler function inside this trending. To make the handler function, let me first add here a comment and specify here API endpoint. So we pass here API trending. So to access this data of this file, you have to just head on to API trending. And here I'm going to export a default function, and I'm going to name this function handler. That's upon you. You can specify any name to this function. Just for that, to this function you need to pass two parameters, request and response. With these parameters, you can get the request and response of the HTTP request. Just for that, I'm going to get the data from this data file. I'm going to get this trending object inside a variable. So to get that, I'm simply going to say constant. In the object, we pass trending is equal to, and then I'm going to pass the data variable, the default object. Now, as you know, we don't have this data object, so we need to first import this file. So I'm going to say here import data from data.js. So I'm going to just access this file data using this data variable. So this is going to return this trending object inside this trending variable. So I'm just using the JavaScript destructuring. Just out of that, here I'm going to say if we have data inside this trending object, or you can say inside this trending variable, then I'm going to return response.status 200, which is the OK status, and then I'm going to return the JSON data. So we pass here trending. And if we don't have any data, I'm going to just return response.status 404. This is the error code, and then I'm going to return a JSON response inside an object. So we pass here error, and in the double quote we pass data not found, something like this. Let me save the changes, back to my project, and here instead of this hello, I'm going to say trending and press enter. You can see I'm going to have my data as a response. So this endpoint is going to return this array of objects. So you can see we have this array of object, and inside this object we have the post data. Now just for that, let me do the same thing for this popular array. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file inside this API, or you can say I'm going to create a new endpoint here, and I'm going to name this popular.js, and this is going to be the API popular endpoint. Here I'm going to say export default function handler. Don't forget to pass request and response parameter, because without it you can't execute this handler function. Just out of that, here I'm also going to import my database file. So I'm going to say here import data from data, and then I'm going to say constant in the object. I'm going to say popular is equal to data. So I'm going to destructure this array inside this variable, and just for that I'm going to say if we have object or data inside this popular variable, then I'm going to return response.status 200.json, and in the JSON I'm going to return this data. And if we don't have any data in this variable, I'm going to return response.status 404.json, and inside an object we pass error data not found. Let me save these changes, back to my project, and instead of trending I'm going to say popular. When I press enter, you can see I'm going to have my data as a response. So now using these endpoints I can access this data, and then I can specify this data to the front end. Now once you understand how you can get the backend data using the API endpoints, let me show you how you can get the individual data of the post using the API endpoint. You can see when you access this popular API endpoint, it's going to return all the data of the document. Instead, what I want only one object from this array of objects. To do that, inside this API, I'm going to create a new folder for this post data. Let me show you how you can get all the post and also the individual post using this API endpoint. So inside this folder right here, I'm going to create a new folder and name it posts, and inside this post I'm going to create a new file and name that file post.js. Now just for that, inside this post.js I'm going to first import data from the data file. Just for that, I'm going to say here export default function, and I'm going to name this function handler with request and response parameter. Just for that, here I'm going to say constant in the object post is equal to data, and then I'm going to say if we have post, then I'm going to return response dot status, and this is going to be the 200 status with the JSON data. So we pass post with this status. Just for that, if we have error and we don't have any data inside this post variable, I'm going to just simply return a response dot status with 404 message, and then I'm going to say here dot JSON, and inside this I'm going to return error object with data not found message. something like this. Now you can see I'm just going to access this post from this data. Oops, I think I misspelled S here. It's post. So I'm just going to destructure the post from this object. Now let me first save the changes and show you the result. So if I just back to the post / post, when I press enter, oops, I think I misspelled here. It's post. Save this. You can see I'm gonna have all my posts as a response. But now what I only want the individual post as a response. So for example, if I add here /1, then I only want this first object as a response from this endpoint. So what we need to do is we need to create a dynamic API route. So when we pass here 1, we need to get this 1 from this route and filter this object. So inside this post right here, I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to name this file postid.js. Now keep in mind, when you create this file, you have to pass this file name inside square bracket. So you pass here file name post id. That's upon you. You can specify any name to this file, and then I'm going to specify here .js. Now this post id is what we call a slug, or you can say a variable. You can specify value to this variable when you call a route. We already learned this in the Next.js course. So I'm going to just create this file, and just out of that, inside this file, let me first get this import statement like this, and then I'm going to say export default, and I'm going to say function, pass your handler function with request and response parameter. Now what I want to do is when the user specify 1 inside this URL, I only want the first ID data. If the user specify here 2, then I want the data of the second ID. And if the user specify here 3, I want the data of the third ID, and so on. So to do that, we need to first get the data from the user. So to get the data from the user, you have a request.query object. And using that object, you can get the data from the URL. So you need to say here request.query, and from this request.query, you can destructure your data value. So here you can say constant in the object, you can specify here post id. So this request.query is going to return that data inside this post id variable. Now you can see the file name and this destructure property is actually same. This is because when you create a file inside this array, that is going to create a new variable, and we can get that variable using a query object. And inside this object, you have the value of the dynamic route data. So 3 is the value of this post id variable. Now let's suppose that you change this file name to just id.js, then this request.query is going to return an object id. You don't have to specify this post id here. I hope you understand how you can use this post id inside this function. Just for that, we need all the data. So we first say here constant in the object. I'm going to say post is equal to data. Inside this data, as you know, we have all the post, and then here we say if we have this post id. So if the user specify post id in the URL, let's suppose that the user specify 1 as a post id, then this if statement is going to execute, and then I'm going to execute the post find method. So I'm going to say here post dot find, and what we need to do is we need to find the object with the id 1. So inside this find, I'm going to say value. Inside this value variable, we have the object. So the find method iterate over an array of object, and then inside this value we have an object, and then here I can say value dot id is equal to post id. I'm going to just access this id from this value. You can see in the database we have this id property. I'm just going to access that id. If it is equal to this post id, then I'm going to return that object. So let me just grab that object inside a variable. So I'm going to say here constant post is equal to, so I'm going to grab that object inside this post, and here I can say return response dot status 200.json, and inside this JSON I'm going to return this post. And if we don't have this post id, I'm just going to return response.status 404.json, and inside this object I'm going to say error, and in the double quote I'm going to say post not found. Now what you have to do is you have to head on to API post and specify your post ID. Let's suppose 1. So we first save the changes, back to the project, and here instead of this post /3, I'm going to say here API /post 1. Now this statement going to return the first object. When I press enter, it's going to return the first object. If I specify here post 2, then this is going to return the second object. And you can do the same with all the objects of your array. Now what I want, when I specify here only post, when I press enter, here I want all my post as a response. You can see this folder is going to return this 404 error message. This is because this post folder is not going to return anything. So what I want to do is I want to return this post data as a response. So when you head on to the API post, I want all this post data as a response. To do that, instead of post.js, you rename this file and specify file name index.js. Now this is the default file inside this API endpoint. So now if I save the changes, back to the project, and if I head on to the API post, then you can see I'm going to have all my post data as a response. So the index.js is the default file for this post endpoint. And if you specify here /1, then this is going to return only one object from the array of object. So you have your first post as a response. So you can easily filter your post using this ID. Now you can do the same thing with this popular and this trending post as well. That's upon you. Now, once you understand how you can create your own API endpoints to access the backend data, let me show you how you can fetch this data and display them in the front end. You can see we have different endpoints here inside this API folder. Let's access this post endpoint and access all the posts and display inside this second section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the second section, and as you know, inside this section we have different posts. I'm going to access this post endpoint and display all these posts using an array of object. So I'm going to iterate over an array of object and display all these posts. So let's see how to do it. I'm going to fetch this first and display inside this second section. So if you're back to the website, then you can notice when you scroll down, your second section, something look like this. You have the latest post and you have the same post images right here inside this second section. So what we need to do is we need to fetch this data. So what we need to do is we need to call the fetch function. So instead of creating a new function inside this file, I'm going to create a new folder here inside this project, and I'm going to name this folder library, or you can say lib. And inside this, I'm going to create a file and name this file helper.js. That's upon you. You can specify any name to this file. What I want to get the data from the post endpoint. So here I'm going to first say API post. So I'm going to just display here endpoint. So let me just add here endpoint like this. And then I'm going to say here export default async function get post. And inside this function, I'm going to say constant response is equal to await and call here fetch function. The fetch function is the JavaScript function which is going to return a promise as a response. Inside this fetch function, you specify your URL endpoint. The URL endpoint is API /post. But what you have to do is you also have to specify port name and the localhost. You have to specify the complete path of your endpoint. So if you just back to your project, then if I specify here API post, when I press enter, then this is going to return all the data. So you have to just copy this URL and then specify that URL right here. So this is the actual endpoint of this get post function. So inside this fetch, you have to specify this endpoint, something like this. Or at the top, right up here, you can create here a constant variable base URL, and then you can specify your endpoint here. And then you can specify this base URL right inside this fetch function. base URL. And now if you want to customize this function a little bit more, then you can get rid of this endpoint right from here. Just pass the base URL here, and after that you pass your endpoint, or you create a parameter to this function which is going to be the params, and then you pass your params here. So when the user call this get post, he need to specify the endpoint. I'm not using this. I'm just going to specify the base URL here, something like this. Just after that, once you have your response, so from this promise you have to get your data, and you need your data in the JSON format. So I'm going to say here constant post is equal to await response.json. So this JSON function is going to return the data in the JSON format to this post variable. After that, here I'm going to say return post. That's it. So I'm just going to make a get request to this endpoint and get the data inside this variable in JSON format and return that using this function. So now if I access this function in the second section right here, then I can get all the data of this endpoint. Let me show you. Let me save this back to the section 2. At the top here, let me first import get post, and I can just copy this. And if I just say here console.log get post, when I save the changes back to my project, and when I open the console, when I reload it, you can see I'm going to have here a promise, and this promise is fulfilled. It means you have an array inside this promise. You can notice you have your data here. To get this data, you have to just call then function. So just call get post dot then, and here you can specify console.log response. Save the changes. When I reload the browser, you can see you're going to have your data. So as you know, you're going to get this data from the backend. So this statement is going to return all the posts as a response inside the console. If you back to this function, then you can notice we just return all the posts as a response. What if I want only one post as a response from this function? You can do that as well. You can specify here a parameter, call id, and then right inside this, here you can say if we have id, then execute this if statement, and then return post dot find, then call value here, iterate over an object, and then specify here value dot id. If it is equal to this id, then return that id as a response. Let me save the changes back to the section 2, and if I specify here 2 back to my project and reload it, you can see I'm going to get the object, or you can say I'm going to get the post of the second id. If I change this to 4, here I'm going to have the post with the id 4. So you can easily get the individual post using this technique. In the Next.js course, we understand how we can use the SWR library. Let's take a look at how we can use that library in the real world examples. Now let's take a look at how you can use SWR, the React hook, for data fetching in the Next.js application. Using SWR, you can fetch the data more easily than the fetch function of JavaScript. We already learned the basics of SWR in the Next.js course. So if you don't know anything about this, I'm going to put a link in the description. Now what you have to do is, you have to first head on to swr.vercel.app and click on this Get Started button. When you click on it, you have to first install SWR in the project. So I'm going to copy this, open my terminal, open a new bash shell, enter into my project directory, and here I'm going to say npm install SWR. This is going to install this library in the project. So once you have this library, let me clear the screen, back to the browser again, and here you can see for normal RESTful APIs with JSON data, first you need to create a fetcher function. So I'm going to just copy this function right from here and paste that inside my project. Now instead of creating this function inside these components, I'm going to create this function inside this library folder right here. So we can access this folder anywhere in the component folder. So right here, I'm going to create a file and name this file fetcher.js. And here I'm going to paste this function. Now let me first explain this function. This function is going to take arguments, and this arguments is going to pass to this fetch function. And then it's going to return the JSON data to this variable. Now once we get this data to this fetch, so when you scroll down, here you can notice you have to use here use SWR hook And then you have to pass your fetcher function as a second argument. As a first argument, you pass the URL endpoint. You can notice here. And this is going to destructure few properties. So you can get these properties inside an object and return your response. So what we are going to do is, instead of doing the same thing for all the components, I'm going to make it reusable. To make this reusable, we create a function and then we call useSWR to it, and then we pass the endpoints, and then we return the user data as a response. Here inside this fetcher function, right down here, I'm going to create a function. So I'm going to say here export default function, and we name this function fetcher. So instead of this fetcher function, we're just going to rename it to response like this. And here I'm going to specify name to this function fetcher like this. And here we need to use SWR hook. So at the top here, we need to say import use SWR from SWR library. From this library, call this use SWR hook. And once you have this hook right inside this function, you can say constant destructure data and error, and then you can specify here equal to sign and say use SWR something like this, and then you pass your base URL here, and as a second argument you pass your fetcher function. Now as you all know, the base URL is this one. So let me just copy this constant variable and paste that right inside this file. But now what I want, instead of creating this base URL and pass this hard-coded value, we can store this value inside the .env file as well. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to just back to the blog. Here I'm going to create a new file and name this file .env.local. And inside this file, I'm going to create this base URL. So I'm going to copy this variable, specify that here is equal to, and then I'm going to specify this base URL here, this one. Let me save these changes, and then you have to rebuild your application. So just open the terminal, stop the development server, clear the screen, and then start it again using npm run dev. Just out of that, to use this base URL, you have to back to the fetcher, and here you have to specify process.env.name of your variable, which is base URL. Now let me just check this value first. So I'm going to back to the section 2. Here I'm going to say console.log, and I'm going to print here this variable like this. Save the changes, and you can see if you open your terminal right down here, you have your base URL. So this is the valid variable. Let me save this. Let me close this file. Keep in mind, you are not going to get this file in the Git repository because we already have this file ignore from this .ignore file. So you have to create this file manually. Once you create that, create a variable inside it and back to the fetcher function. And just out of that, here I'm going to specify the base URL. I'm going to first pass here backtick operator, pass here my variable base URL like this, and then I also want to specify the endpoint. As you know, this is my endpoint API post. So we pass this endpoint here. But what I want to reuse this function multiple times. So instead of passing this endpoint here, I'm going to just pass a parameter to this fetcher function. So here I'm going to pass endpoint like this, and then we pass this endpoint right here. That's it. And at the end, as a second parameter, we pass response function, this one. Now once you have your data inside this data variable, and once you have your error inside this error variable, we can just return that. So we are going to just simply say here return in the object, we can say data, or you can specify here data like this, or you can just get rid of this first property. It will create a property and value, and then I'm going to say is loading. Then I'm going to pass here error if we don't have anything inside this error, and if we don't have anything inside the data, then print the loading message, or you can say then return true to this loading. Just for that, here I'm going to say is error is equal to error. If you have error, then specify value to this property. The fetcher function is now ready. Let me show you how you can use this. Let me save this file, close this fetcher, this helper function, and inside this second section, let me use this function. So right up here, I'm going to first import this fetcher function. So I'm going to say here import from /library, and from that we have this fetcher function. So I'm going to just simply get this fetcher function inside this file. Just out of that, here I'm going to say constant. In the object, as you know, we can destructure these properties. Data is loading and is error. So we can say here data is loading and is error. And we can destructure these properties from the fetcher function. And as you know, to this fetcher function, we need to specify the endpoint. So in the single quote, I can specify API post, something like this. And then here I can say console.log data. Let me save these changes, back to the project. And if I inspect, oops, I think I misspelled something. Here we have the 404 not found error. This is because I think this statement is going to execute on the server side. So let me get rid of this process.env file and specify my localhost 3000 here. Now let me save the changes, back to the project and reload it. You can see I'm going to have the result what I want. But you can also see here we have two undefined messages. To remove it, you have to grab this console.log in the if statement. You have to say if we have data, only then return this console message. Let me save this, back to the project and reload it. You can see I'm going to have the result what I want. Now I can specify this data to this latest post section. So next I'm going to show you I can do that. Now once you understand how you can get the data from the backend and destructure it inside these variables, let me show you how you can display this data inside this latest post section. So once you have your data as an array of object, you can display them inside this latest post section. To display it, you have to use this data variable. Inside this data variable, you have an array of object. So to iterate over this data, you have to call the map function of JavaScript. So instead of all these posts, you can just simply pass here an object like this, and then pass data, the array of object, and then specify here dot map. And inside this map, you specify value and index, and then you call here a function, or you can return this function with parentheses, something like this. And then inside this, you have to call this post function. I'm going to call this function as a component. So to call this, I'm going to say here post and press tab. This will just create a component and call this function right inside this map function. And then we pass here data. We pass data is equal to, and in the parentheses, we pass this value. Keep in mind, inside this value, we have an object. Because inside this data, we have array of object. This map function is going to iterate over each object, and inside this variable, we have an object. We pass this object to this data variable, and then we can access this data variable inside this post. Just for now, I'm going to specify value, and as well as you also need to specify here a key. Now because we are iterating over this component, you need to specify unique key to this component. So we pass here index, something like this. Or you can specify the ID of this value as well. As you know, inside your data, you have data ID. You can specify that ID here as well. Inside this post, you can access this data variable using data property. So you need to call here an object and pass here data. Now inside this data, you have an object. You can destructure this object right down here. So you can say here constant. In the object, you can specify equal to sign and then specify here data. And to destructure all the values of this data, in this object, you can specify ID, you can specify category, img, the image, then the publish property and the author. You have all these properties inside your data. Now, if you want, you can do the same thing inside this parentheses as well, but we'll look at that later. Just for now, to this data, instead of these hard-coded values, we can now specify these values. So what I'm going to do is, instead of this source, here, I can simply specify img, the data which we will have from the database. So I'm going to specify img, and then I'm going to specify the default value /. So if we don't have anything inside this img, I'm going to specify this default value here. Just after that, I'm also going to specify this category, published, and this author. So right down here, this is the categories. So I'm going to just back to these categories right here, get rid of this business and travel. And here I'm going to specify an object and pass category. And then I'm going to specify the default value unknown. Let me do the same thing for this data as well. So I'm going to pass here an object, pass here publish, and then pass the default value, which is unknown. So if we don't have any value inside these variables, this statement is going to print unknown as a hard-coded value. Just after that, to this title, we specify this title, this one. So we need to first import this title as well. So inside this section 2, I'm going to specify here title like this. And then I'm going to get rid of this title right from here and then specify this title here inside this object like this, and then pass default value title. Just after that, I'm going to leave this paragraph as it is. If you want, you can specify this paragraph value from the post. So if you just open the post, here you have your subtitle. You can just specify this subtitle property to this paragraph. I'm going to leave this as it is because you get the idea. Just after that, what we need to do is I only want to print this author when we have data inside this author variable. So instead of this author, I'm going to get rid of it, call here an object, and I'm going to say if we have author and if we have value inside it, then and only then print this author, otherwise print nothing, something like this. Now let me save the changes. Now you can see you have all your images here. So your latest post is now fetching the data from the backend. But what if I reload this browser? You can see I'm going to get an error message. Data is undefined. This is because this statement is going to take some time to get the data from this fetcher function. So what we need to do is we need to use this isLoading and isError if there is an error inside this component. So I'm going to get rid of this statement, and instead of this console.log, here we can say if is loading, means if the data is loading, then I'm going to return a division tag with loading message, something like this. And then if it is error, if anything went wrong and you will get an error message, I'm going to return a div with error message. I'm going to just save the changes and reload the browser. You can see I'm going to have my data. So now when I reload the browser, you're not going to get any error. Now just after that, instead of this loading and this isError, you can specify your component here. Now once you understand how you can display this isLoading and isError message when you don't have your data, let me show you how you can create this component. Instead of just this division tag, I'm going to create a new component and create a spinning animation. So let's create a new component inside this child, and I'm going to name this component spinner.js. That's upon you. You can specify any name to this file. Here I'm going to export a default function, and I'm going to name this function spinner, and then here inside this function I'm going to return JSX, and inside this JSX I'm going to return a division tag with some class names. So I'm going to say here flex justify center to center this spinner, and then padding by 14. So this will add top and bottom padding to this spinner. Just after that, here I'm going to add just a span tag and then specify class name to it, which is loader. Now this is a custom class name. Let me show you what we're going to specify to this class name inside CSS. So let me first save the changes, back to the section 2, and here instead of this loading, now I can just import this component. I can say here import spinner from this spinner file, and then I'm going to grab this spinner and specify that right here, something like this. And once you've done that, you're not going to see anything. This is because we don't have any CSS to this loader. So let me just back to the styles and open the globals.css. And inside this globals.css, right down here, I'm going to create a spinner. So I'm going to say here dot loader, I'm going to call this class name loader. Make sure the name is exactly same. And then I'm going to say here apply. I'm going to call some Tailwind classes here. So first class is border gray 200. Then I'm going to specify rounded full. Then specify border 4. Just out of that, I'm going to specify is linear. And then specify height is going to be 10. And width is going to be 10. Just out of that, I'm going to specify some color to this spinner. So border top color is going to be the hex value. So I'm going to just specify some hex value here, 363CE0. Then I'm going to call the animation. So to call the animation, I need animation property. And to this animation property, I'm going to create and specify my animation. So let me specify here spinner, the animation name, and then specify the speed to it. So I'm going to specify 1.2 second, which is linear and infinite. Now just out of that, keep in mind you need to create this animation. So right down here, you can call @ and pass keyframe. Using keyframe in CSS, you can create different animations. So I'm going to call here keyframes and specify name to it. As you know, we specify name to it, spinner. So let's copy it and specify that here. And inside an object, you specify the animation. So on the 0%, you specify transform property to it. Transform rotate is going to be 0 degree. And on 100%, the transform property is going to be rotate 360 degree. That's it. We are just going to rotate this spinner using this animation. So on 0%, I'm going to specify 0 degree. And when the percentage is 100%, I'm going to specify 360 degree to this spinner. Back to my spinner. Save this file as well. Back to the section 2. And if I reload the browser, you're not going to see anything. But if I specify here true to execute only this if statement, you can see you're going to have your spinner here. So if anything went wrong and you have some delay to getting the data from the backend, you will get this spinner animation. You can do the same thing for error as well. So what we are going to do is, instead of this true, I'm going to specify here is loading, and I'm going to make this is error true. Now I'm going to execute only this division tag, but what I want, instead of this div, I want to create my own component for the error as well. So inside this child, I'm going to create a new file and name this file error.js. And inside this, here I'm going to call first the import statement image from the Next.js image, and then I'm going to say export default function. The function name is error, and then I'm going to say return division tag with some Tailwind classes. So specify class name, text center, and padding y 10. Inside this div, here I'm going to add h1 heading tag with some classes. So I'm going to specify here text 3XL, font bold, text orange 600, padding y 10, and specify here text, which is something went wrong. Just out of that, just out of this h1 heading tag, here I'm going to add my image component, this one, and then specify here image. So in the source, I'm going to specify the image. As you know, to specify image, you need to specify images / not found.png. You have this image inside the images folder. Don't worry about that. And just out of that, here we specify width, which is going to be 400 pixel. Height is going to be also 400 pixel. Let me save this. Back to the section 2. Instead of this div, let me just import here error from this child component, something like this. And then instead of this div, I'm going to specify here error component. Save this file. Oops, something went wrong. Let me see. If I scroll down in the images, right here, the name of the image is not found. I just specify here no found. Now let me just save this file. Back to my project, and here you can notice you have your error component. So if something went wrong, you will get this image with this error message. That's upon you. You can change this error message and you can create your own error component inside this project. So let me just specify here is error and save this file. Now when I'm back to my project, reload it, you can see right here, you will see the spinner. You can see. So this is how you can create a spinner and the error component inside the project. Now you get the idea how you can specify the backend data to the second section. Now let's take a look at how we can do the same thing for this first section, for this most popular third section, and for this category section. So let me just grab the data and specify that to this section. So I'm going to back to my project and let me just specify my backend data to the first section. I'm going to open the file, section 1, and right down here, as you can see here, I'm going to specify the swiper. So what I want to do is, to this swiper, to this slide, I want to specify the backend data. To specify that, I'm going to open the section 2. As you can see right up here, you have this fetcher function to get the backend data. Copy this 3 line of code and specify that in the first section, right up here. And as you know, you need to import these components and this fetcher function. So I'm going to back to the second section, copy this 3 import statement and specify that right down here. Just out of that, once you have all this data inside this data variable, you can just iterate over it and display them right inside this swiper. So instead of this swiper, I'm going to get rid of it, and here I'm going to add an object. And then I'm going to say here data.map, and inside this map, as you know, I'm going to specify value and index, something like this. And then I'm going to pass here equal to sign and then pass a function here. I'm going to specify the swiper slide. So I'm going to say here swiper slide, and inside this component, I'm going to have my slide function, this one. So here I'm going to say slide, something like this. Just out of that, to this swiper slide, I'm going to specify key index. So this will just uniquely identify this swiper slide. Just out of that, to this slide, we pass data, which is going to be the value, this object. And now I can iterate over this object and specify these values to this data. So right down here, I'm just going to destructure all the values of this data variable. So as you know, inside this section 1, when you scroll down here, you have the destructure statement. Let me copy this and specify that here. Now, just out of that, what I want to display this data inside this JSX. So instead of this image, I'm going to simply specify here img variable, and the default value is going to be the /. After that, to this categories, right here, I'm going to get rid of this hard-coded value, and here I'm going to specify categories, something like this, and the default value is unknown. Let me copy this unknown, so we can easily specify that everywhere. Get rid of this date and then specify here publish property. The default value is going to be unknown. Let me do the same for this title. So I'm going to grab this title, get rid of it, and here I'm going to specify title. The default value is unknown. Just out of that, I also want to grab the data of the description from this variable. So here I'm going to say description, something like this, and then instead of this hard-coded value in the object, description, and the default value is description. Just out of that, let me do the same for this author. So in the second section, as you can see, I just specify here a conditional author component. So let me just copy and paste this right here. Just out of that, when I scroll up, you can see I'm just grabbing the data from the post endpoint. Instead of post, now I'm going to grab this data from the trending endpoint, the pages API. Then you can see we have this trending endpoint here. I'm going to specify this endpoint right here. So I'm going to say here trending. Now, just out of that, when I specify this, scroll down, we need to specify this data to this slide. So right here in the object, don't forget to specify data. Back to the project, and you can see you have your data in the slide. That's super easy, right? Now, Just after that, let me do the same thing for this most popular section. So I'm going to open the third section of this blog. I'm going to open the third section like this. And from the first section, I'm going to copy few things. So let me copy these 3 statements because we are using these 3 statements in all the components. And then I'm going to copy these 3 import statement as well. Something like this. And then instead of this trending, we are getting this data from the popular section. So I'm going to say here popular. You can see inside this API, we have this endpoint popular. So I'm grabbing this data from this endpoint. Just out of that, let me scroll down. And here, instead of this post swiper slide, I'm going to grab this data from the first slide. Back to the first slide, copy this statement, and paste that inside this third section. And then what you have to do is you have to get rid of this slide right from here, because you know that we have this post function inside this third slide. So we pass here post and then pass here data. And then I'm going to specify equal to sign and pass value here. Just out of that, you need to specify this value to this post. So here you pass data and this structure, all the properties. So I'm going to copy and paste here the structure properties. Now, just out of that, let me specify these values here. So I'm going to just change this image source like this. Then I'm going to specify here categories. So get rid of this hard-coded value, specify category here. Then I'm going to specify here publish property with the default value. Then for the title, I'm going to get rid of this hard-coded value of the title right from here and specify here title with the default value, no title. And just out of that, instead of this description, I'm going to specify the description with no description default value. And at the end, I'm going to just copy this statement and specify that right here. Let me save the changes back to my project, and you can see the most popular section is also ready. Now let me do the same thing for this last section, for this category section. So I'm going to open this section 4. I'm going to just copy these 3 statements right from here, specify that at the top to this 4th section, leave everything as it is, copy these 3 import statement, specify that here. Just out of that, as you can see inside this data, you have an array of object. But now instead of this 4th section, instead of adding here an array of object, you are going to call here data property with the value. So instead of adding here a map function, I'm going to say here an object and pass data, call the first object from it. And if we have value here, then I'm going to call this post function right here, something like this. And then to this post, we pass data, which is going to be data of 1. And if we don't have this data, then return nothing. Now let me do the same thing right here, right down here. So I'm going to pass here second object and third object. So let me just rename this to second object, and this became third object. And do the same for the second column as well. So I'm going to copy and paste this right here. And this time I'm going to change this ID. This became 4, 5, and 2. Now because I only have 5 elements inside this data, I'm going to duplicate this second element inside this second column. Just out of that, you need to specify here 4, 5, and 2. That's it. Just out of that, you need to call this data inside this post. So here you specify data and this structure few properties here, something like this. Get rid of this image hard-coded value, specify here img, then do the same for the categories. So get rid of this hard-coded value, specify here categories, get rid of this hard-coded date, pass here publish date, get rid of this title and specify here title with the default value, no title. Let me back to this third section, copy this author and specify that in the 4th section like this. You can see the 4th section is also ready. Save this file, back to the project, and you can see I'm going to have the result what I want. So this is how you can specify your backend data to the front end. Now you can see the blog page is completely ready. Next we will move to the individual post. So if I move to the post page, then you can see we have here the individual post. But what I want to get this data from the backend, as well as I want to specify here dynamic routing. Now let me show you how you can use dynamic route to display this blog page inside this blog. You can see when you open the post page, you will have this blog. What I want, when I click on this post, let's suppose if I click on this post, I want to open this individual post, something like this. But you can see we just specify the hard-coded post inside this page.js file. So what I'm going to do is, if the user specify here 1, then I want to open the first blog post. If the user specify here 2, I want to open the second blog post, and so on. So let me just show you how you can do that using dynamic API routing. So I'm going to back to my project, close all these files, and I'm going to back to the pages and open this post. Right here you have this page.js. So what I want, when the user open the first block, I want to display all the data of the first block right inside this page file. So what you have to do is, you have to first make this page as dynamic route. To make this, you have to rename this page and specify here dynamic route value, or you can say the slug. So to create a slug, you specify here square brackets and then specify your slug. So we pass here post ID. That's upon you. You can specify any slug here. I'm going to choose slug post ID. It means when the user specify value inside the URL, I'm going to get that value inside the post ID slug, or you can say in the variable. So when you create this file, now this file is now became the dynamic route. Now just for that, when the user specify here 1, I want to get the first blog post and display all the data of the blog post right inside this page. So to do that, we are using get static props of Next.js. So I'm going to just scroll down here, and here I'm going to say export async function, which is going to be get static props. Now this function is going to execute on build time. We already learned the basics of this function. Now inside this function, what we need to do is we need to first get all the routes. So I'm going to say here constant post is equal to, and then we pass here await. Now because this is async function, we can use here await. Just for that, I'm going to get all the post using this helper function. You can see inside this lib right here, we have this helper.js. We can get all the posts using this getPost function. And if I specify the individual post value, then I can get the individual post as well. So let me just show you how you can use this. I'm going to back to this post ID, and right up here I'm going to say import helper from the component helper, and then I'm going to grab this get post. Now because this is the default export from this helper, we can just specify here get post. Just for that, let me scroll down, and here I can specify get post and pass here parentheses. Now inside this post, I'm going to have an array of object, and inside that object we have all the posts. But what I want, instead of getting all the posts, I'm going to just simply grab only one post. So I'm going to pass here 1. So this is going to return only one post inside this post variable. If you back to the helper.js, we already learned how we can get the individual post. So we just pass here ID. So this post is going to return only one object from this function. Now if you want, you can change this API route as well. That's upon you. I'm using this default API route, which is post. I'm going to back to this function, and now once I have this post, I can now specify this post to the component. So I'm going to say here return. In the object, we pass props, and to this props, I'm going to specify post, this post. And now I can access this post in my component if I specify here in the object post. Now let me just specify these values here. So what I'm going to do is, as you know, to this author, I'm going to grab this statement and specify that here. But before we specify this statement, we need to grab these values. We need to first destructure these values right down here. I'm going to say constant. In the object, we pass title, image, subtitle, description, and author. And we are getting this value from the post. And then I'm going to specify these values right here. Just for that, I'm going to specify title. So I'm going to get rid of this hard-coded value, specify here title. Let me do the same for the subtitle as well. So here I'm going to get rid of this value and specify subtitle, something like this. And then, as you know, we also have the image. So instead of this hard-coded value, here I'm going to pass the img variable. And then instead of this paragraphs, I'm going to specify the description, something like this. Now let me save the changes, back to my browser and reload it. You can see I'm going to have an error message here. Get static path is required for the dynamic server-side generation pages. So when you create the dynamic server-side generation page, you have to call get static path function as well. So you have to create that function as well. So just down here, you have to say here export async function, which is going to be get static path. You can notice the name of both these functions are different. We are using here get static props to get the properties, and we are using here get static path to specify values to the dynamic routes. So here I'm going to say get static paths, and then I'm going to specify here constant post is equal to await, and then I'm going to get all the posts. So I'm going to call get post function. Here I'm not going to get only one post. This is because there are different possibilities of this get static path. You might have here 1, 2, 3 and so on. So there are multiple possibilities of the path. So we are going to just get all that post, and then we pass all the possible values to the parameter. So I'm just going to say here constant path is equal to post dot map. I'm going to call here map function on this post array, and here I'm going to say value and call an object. Inside this, I'm going to return an object and say params, and to this params you need to specify the value to this post id slug. So here I'm going to say post id, pass here colon, and the value is going to be the IDs. So we have here an object inside this value, so we pass here value dot id, and keep in mind this is a type of string and this value is a type of number. So you have to convert this value into string. So to do that, you need to specify here to string function of JavaScript, something like this. Just out of that, you need to just return this path from this function. So right down here, just out of this function here, you say return, and here you return all the path, all the possible paths, and then I'm going to say fallback is going to be false. Let me save the changes, back to the browser, and now reload it. Here I'm going to have an error, map is not defined. Let me check my code again. Yeah, right here I just imported this get post from this header. Instead we have this get post inside the helper file. So let me just pass that here, get post. Let me save this file, back to the project, and now let me reload it. Here I'm going to have the error. This is because cannot destructure a property called title of post as it is undefined. Now this is because you're just returning here post. So you can just destructure all your values inside this parenthesis. I use here an object and then destructure it inside this statement. So instead of destructuring these values right here, I can pass this value right to this component, something like this. Save this file, back to my project, and reload it. You can see I'm going to have what I want. So we have the data of the first block in this project. If I change this one value to 2, I will have my second block. If I specify here 3, I'm going to have my third block. But you can notice you're still going to get the first block as a response. This is because inside this get props, you have here 1. Means this statement is always going to return the first block. So what you want to do is, you want to get this value from the URL and specify that to this function. To get this URL value, you can just specify here a property params. You can access this params object inside this get static props, and from this property you can access this post id. So here I'm going to say params dot post id, something like this. Now let me save the changes, back to my project, and here you can see I'm going to have my third block as a response. if I specify here 4, I'm going to have my fourth block. If I specify here 2, I'm going to have my second block. So now I can navigate through my different blocks using this URL. Now you can specify this URL to your link component and navigate through different blocks. Now, once we understand how we can use the dynamic route inside this blog page, let's take a look at how we can use SWR. As you all know, using this get static props, Next.js is going to build this page statically when we build this application. But what if I use here SWR? SWR used to fetch data from the backend and it is useful for caching. What if I say you can use all the features of get static props with SWR? With SWR, you can use all the features of get static props along with the SWR feature. Using SWR, you can pre-render the page for SEO and also have features such as caching, revalidation, focus tracking, refetching on interval on the client side. So let me just use SWR inside this page and show you how you can use it. So what we are going to do is we need to first import a fetcher function. So I'm going to say here import fetcher from, in the single quote, I'm going to say // then specify // again, and inside this lib folder here I'm going to have this fetcher.js file. I'm going to just import this fetcher from this file. Then I'm going to use this function right inside this page. But what I want, instead of using this function right inside this page, I'm going to create a new component. So instead of exporting this function right here at the top, I'm going to say export default function page. And I'm going to rename this function to article and get rid of this default statement. You can also get rid of this export from here because we are only exporting this default function page. Now inside this page, here I'm going to simply say constant. In the object, we pass data is loading and is error. As you know, you're going to get all these properties from the fetcher function. And here I'm going to pass backtick operator and then specify the endpoint, which is API /post. Now, as you know, this endpoint is going to return all the posts. So what we are going to do is, instead of getting all the posts, I only want a single post. So if you open your API, if you open the post, right down here, you can see we have this post ID slug. Using this endpoint, we can get only one post if I specify here /1. So this is going to return only first post as a response inside this data variable. Later, we will understand how we can change this hard-coded value. Just for now, I'm going to leave this as it is. Right down here, I can say if is loading, if it is true, then I'm going to return my component. So we need to first import right up here, import is loading from // and then specify here my components. From the components child, and inside this child we have this spinner. So instead of this is loading, here I'm going to say spinner. And when we have true inside this if statement, I'm going to return my spinner. Just for that, here I'm going to say if we have error, so I'm going to say is error. If we have error, then I'm going to return my error component. So I'm going to say here import error component from single quote // then specify components child, and here we have the error component. So I'm going to copy this and paste that right here. So if anything went wrong, I'm going to get both this statement as a response. Just so that if we have the data, then I'm going to return here my article, this function, this one. And as you know, to this article, you can see we have this structure properties. So we can pass here inside this object, we can pass data. But this data is now going to return an object. So we need to destructure this right here. So we pass here spread operator, something like this. So now we can destructure all these values inside this article component. Now let me save these changes. And show you the result. You can see I'm going to get the first post as a response. If I change this URL to 3, I'm still going to get the first block. This is because here I choose 1. Now what I want to get this parameter value inside this page component. To get that, right up here, you need to import useRouter from Next.js. So here you have to say import useRouter from Next.js. So pass here next and specify here router. So from the Next.js router, I'm going to use useRouter hook. And then right down here, I'm going to say constant router is equal to useRoute. So I'm going to call this hook, and then here I can say router dot query. And in this query, I'm going to have an object, and inside that object, we have a property called post ID. So to get that post ID, we have to just destructure it. So here I'm going to say constant. In the object, we can destructure this property. The property name is post ID. And now I can use this property and specify that right here. So we pass here $. In the object, I can specify here post ID. Let me save the changes. Back to the browser, and now you can see when I change this URL, I'm going to get different post data. So that's super easy to get the data from the URL inside a component. Just for that, I want to initialize this component as SWR. So we need to first configure the SWR, and then we can pass the data from the SWR. So we can easily cache that data and pass to the component. So at the top, here I'm going to say import. In the object, we import SWR config from the SWR library, and we need to wrap this component in SWR config. So I'm going to say here SWR config like this, and then we need to paste the article component as it is. And just for that, here you need to pass value, and inside this value you have to specify the fallback value. So if nothing changes, you will specify the fallback value, otherwise specify the updated data. Here you pass a parameter called fallback, and you get this fallback from the component right up from here, fallback, something like this. And now what you have to do is you have to specify this fallback value. So when you create this component, you're going to get this value from the get static props right from here. So you need to specify here props, and inside this props you can specify fallback value. So here we specify fallback, specify an object, and then here we specify the endpoint. So in the single quote, we pass / API post, and to this endpoint, as you know, we have a data called post, this one. So we specify that data here. So what we are going to do is, using SWR, we are just going to cache this data. Instead of getting this data every time when we update this component, I'm going to get this data from the cache. Let me save this file, back to the project and reload it. Now this data is coming from the cache memory. Now we can do the same thing and use the same technique to cache the data for all the components. That's upon you. You can use this SWR config and cache your data. Now let's suppose that you want to move to the third blog page. You're not going to edit this URL and specify here 3 to move to the third blog post. Instead, you click on the blog title or on the image. So what you have to do is, when you back to the home page, when the user click on this title or on this image, I want to navigate user to the blog page. So let's see how to do it. I'm going to close all the files, and now I'm going to open the section 1. Inside this section, right here you can notice we have this link component, and we just pass here / the root path of the website. Instead of specifying this root path, here now I can specify the blog page ID. As you know, to access the blog ID, you have to navigate to the pages. Inside that you have post, and inside this post you have your blog post. To access this blog post, you need to get the blog post ID. When you scroll down inside this first section, you can see here you have the ID parameter. You can use this ID parameter to navigate through different blog posts. Instead of this / here, now I can specify post. Now because we have this post inside these pages, we are just going to pass this folder name post, and we need to specify the dynamic ID, which is the post ID value. We are going to get this value from this ID. So here, instead of this double quote, I'm going to specify here backtick operator and then pass here my post. And inside this, and here I can say dollar in the object, I'm going to pass the ID, this one. So when we iterate over an object, I'm also going to pass the ID to the link component. Let me copy this and paste that to all my link components, something like this. Save this file, back to the first section. Let's suppose if I click on this post, you can see it will navigate me to the blog page. I can do the same thing for any of these posts. You can see. Now let me do the same thing for all these blog posts. I'm going to open the components, open the second section, scroll up, then I can get rid of this default value, and here I'm going to specify this post ID like this. Save this, open the third section, do the same thing here as well. So I'm going to paste this post ID, something like this, and I'm going to do the same thing for this last section. Save this file, back to the project, and now when you click on any of these posts, let's suppose that if I click on this second post, when I click on the image, I'm going to navigate to the second blog post. You can see here. Now, just for that, let me add some finishing touch to this website. Right down here, you can see we have this most popular section. And here I have two blocks inside a swiper. What I want to make this swiper completely responsive for all the devices. So I'm going to back to the third section. Here we have this swiper, you can see. Now to make this swiper completely responsive, you can specify here a property called breakpoint. You can say here breakpoints is equal to, and in the object you pass different breakpoints. So I'm going to say here on 640 pixel, I'm going to have slides per view is going to be 2. And then I'm going to say space between is going to be 30. And now I'm going to get rid of this slides per view property, because what I want after 640 pixel, I want 2 slides inside this swiper. And if the viewport is less than that, I want only 1 slide. So that is why I remove this property from here. Let me save the changes. If I open the inspect tool, when I decrease the viewport, you can see when the viewport is less than 640 pixel, inside this swiper, we only going to have 1 slide per view. You can notice. Now the viewport is less than 640 pixel. If I increase the viewport, I'm going to have 2 slides. And if the viewport is less than that, I'm going to have only 1 slide. So I can do the same thing for all the slides of this website. Now you can see the website is about to ready. But what we need to do is, at the last, we need to pass data from the backend to this author section and to this related post section. So let's see how to do it. I'm going to open the section 1 right here. You can see I'm going to have this author component. So to this author, I'm going to pass this variable author. Inside this author, as you know, we have the data. So if you open the pages, API, data, then you can notice we have this author object here. And using this object, you can pass name, image, and designation. So let's pass this value to this author component. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this author from this data, and then I'm going to pass that right here. So I'm going to pass here an object, pass a triple dot, and pass author. So I can destructure all these properties inside the author component. So inside this child, here I'm going to open the author, and inside these parentheses right here, I can say name, img, and designation. Just out of that, here I'm going to say if I don't have name, and if I don't have image, then I'm not going to print the author. Instead, I'm going to return nothing. And if we have name and image, then I can specify that right here. So I can just simply specify here the image, the name. So here inside this, I'm going to specify the name, and then I'm going to specify the designation like this. Back to my project. Now when I go to the browser, you can see I'm going to get the author as a response inside this first section. If I scroll down, I don't have my author here. This is because I did not specify this value to the author component. So I'm going to copy this statement inside the second section right here. I'm going to replace this statement with the author value like this. Do the same for all the sections, something like this, and pass this statement to all the components. Save this file back to the pages, and inside the pages, as you know, inside this post, you have this post ID, and here you also have the author. So here you also specify this statement. Save the changes, back to the project, and now reload it. Here you can see you have your author here. Now, just out of that, what I want, when I click on the post, I want to pass data to this related post section. So to pass that, I'm going to back to the components, open the related post. Inside this child, here I have related, and to this related, I'm also going to have this author. So let me just replace this author with this statement like this. And at the top, right up here, I'm going to destructure a few values from the data, and this data is coming from this object right from here, and then I can pass these values right inside this component. So let me just pass this image, then I'm going to pass the category, then specify the publish property, specify the title right down here. I'm going to specify title, and after that we need to specify this link values. As you know, in the first section or in the second section you have this post ID, so I'm going to pass that inside this related right here. So I'm going to pass this post / inside this dollar we have this ID. We need to first import this ID here like this. Let me replace this link component with this href value so we can navigate through different components. Just out of that, at the top you need to pass value to this data. So at the top right up here, you are going to call the fetcher function. So as you know, in the second section you have the fetcher function. So if you scroll up, you have these three statements: the fetcher function, the isLoading component, and isError component. I'm going to copy this, paste that inside this related component right up here. I'm going to say import fetcher from the fetcher, spinner from the spinner file. Now because you can see we have the spinner file in the current directory, that is why I just going to specify here // and then specify the spinner. I'm do the same for this error as well. So I'm going to say here error from the error file like this, and save this file. Just out of that, I'm going to pass this data to this post. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate over this post data and then print all the components. So right down here, I'm going to specify an object and specify here data.map. I'm going to call here a function called map of JavaScript, and then specify here value and index. Just out of that, here I'm going to say post, and to this post we need to first specify key. The key is going to be the index value. So we first uniquely identify this post parent component, and then we pass here data value. Inside this curly braces we pass this value variable. Let me get rid of all these statements from down here. Now what you have to do is you have to return this statement. Instead of returning this statement, I can simply pass here parenthesis like this. So now I don't have to specify the return statement here. Let me save this file, back to the project, and now you can see I'm going to have all my components with the author. So this is how you can create this complete website using Next.js and Tailwind. If you want to back to your root directory, you can click on this website logo. When you click on your website logo, you can redirect to your home page. This is how you can create this beautiful website with Next.js. So I hope you enjoyed the complete Next.js journey. Now, if you want to download this complete project, you have to check out inside this last branch of this project. So you have to just specify a command called git switch and then specify the branch name, which is 22. When you press tab, you're going to get the name of the branch and press enter. When you press enter, you're on the 22 finishing branch. So if you have any question, don't forget to comment me down. If you find anything useful, don't forget to press the like button, share this video with your friends, subscribe for more latest videos. That is all for now. I will see you with the new project in the next one.